The collapse of mankind's interstellar civilization did not occur in a single cataclysmic moment, but rather as a cascading series of failures that ultimately plunged humanity into its darkest age. The period known as Old Night descended upon Terra like a suffocating shroud in the 25th millennium, as the golden achievements of the dark age of technology crumbled to dust. What had once been mankind's crowning glory, a federation of human worlds spanning the galaxy, connected by reliable warp travel and protected by men of iron, disintegrated under the weight of its own hubris. The first signs of collapse manifested in the form of increasingly violent warp storms that churned across the galaxy, severing vital trade routes and communication networks. These tempests in the immaterium were the harbingers of a psychic awakening in humanity, a species-wide evolutionary step that would prove as dangerous as it was transformative. Astropathic communications faltered, then failed entirely. Ships disappeared into the warp never to return, or worse, emerged as twisted hulks crewed by the insane or possessed. Terra, once the jewel of human civilization, found itself cut off from its countless colony worlds. The cradle of mankind, which had for millennia exported rather than produced, could no longer sustain its teeming billions without the constant influx of resources from across the stars. The carefully balanced ecosystem of trade, which had allowed Terra to become an administrative and cultural center rather than a productive one, collapsed virtually overnight. In the vacuum left by the dissolution of unified planetary governance, power devolved to whoever could seize and hold it. The first warlords emerged from military commanders, corporate oligarchs, and technocratic elites who had access to the remaining functional technology. They carved Terra into competing fiefdoms, each claiming legitimacy through various means, some through technological superiority, others through sheer military might, and still others through cult-like devotion to charismatic leaders. These early power structures quickly gave way to more brutal regimes as resources dwindled and desperation mounted. The techno-barbarians, as later imperial historians would name them, were not simply thuggish brutes but sophisticated tyrants who combined remnant technology with newly developed systems of control. The Pan-Pacific Empire stretched across what had once been the Pacific Rim nations, ruled by a council of genetically enhanced admirals who commanded the last functioning fleets on Terra's poisoned oceans. Their rivals, the Indonesic bloc, controlled vast territories through a system of cybernetically augmented overseers who demanded flesh tributes from their subjects, humans who would be converted into servitor labor or used for organ harvesting. In the irradiated wastes of what had once been called Europa, the Nordic composite emerged as a confederation of gene cults who worshipped modified human forms as manifestations of ancient gods. Their warriors, enhanced with chimeric animal traits, raided neighboring territories in longships powered by salvaged grav engines. The composite's eastern borders constantly clashed with the Ursh Dominion, perhaps the largest of the Terran empires, whose rulers had mastered crude but effective forms of weather control that they used to devastating effect against their enemies. The High Brazil biomagnates controlled the remnants of the southern continental mass through monopolization of viable agricultural land. Their caste of gene crafters created specialized human strains designed for specific agricultural tasks, treating their subjects as little more than ambulatory tools. The biomagnates traded their precious food supplies to other realms in exchange for technology, weapons, and slaves, maintaining a veneer of neutrality while playing the other powers against each other. Among the most feared of the techno-barbarian states was the Pan-Pacific Empire, whose ruling class had developed a form of neural interfacing that allowed them to directly control legions of drugged soldiers through pain-pleasure conditioning. Their expansion was checked only by the Antarctic fraternity to the south, whose fortress cities buried deep in the ice shelves housed the most complete libraries of Dark Age knowledge remaining on Terra, guarded by fanatical scholar warriors who modified themselves with extreme cold adaptations. In the region once known as the Middle East, the Caucasus Wastes had become home to the Terrawat clan, who controlled the last major functioning fusion generators on the planet. Their monopoly on reliable energy production made them untouchable to many would-be conquerors, as they could simply shut down power to any region that threatened them, condemning millions to death in the freezing darkness. The environmental devastation that accompanied this political fragmentation was nearly total. Terra's atmosphere had become a toxic miasma of industrial pollutants, radioactive particles, and chemical warfare agents. Vast swathes of the planet were uninhabitable wastelands, where only the most heavily augmented or protected could survive for more than hours. The once blue oceans had turned to caustic, sludge-filled basins, where mutated leviathans preyed upon desperate fisher tribes who risked slow poisoning for the chance to harvest protein. Ancient forests and grasslands existed only in the historical archives maintained by secretive preservation cults. In their place stretched endless urban sprawl, factory complexes, mine workings, and war zones. Mountains had been hollowed for hive cities or simply removed entirely for their mineral wealth. The planet's crust was honeycombed with tunnel networks, many of which had become the domains of regressed human subspecies who had adapted to permanent subterranean existence. Perhaps most emblematic of Terra's fall was the state of the Himalayan mountains. Once the tallest natural formation on the planet, they had been systematically demolished and processed during the dark age of technology, reduced to a fraction of their former height. The resulting plateau became home to a patchwork of fortress monasteries belonging to various techno-cults, each guarding some fragment of ancient knowledge or technology like jealous dragons. The devastation was not limited to the physical environment. Terra's noosphere, the collective psychic imprint of humanity upon the warp, had become a churning nightmare of fear, hatred, and despair. This psychic pollution attracted predatory warp entities that found the veil between realms thinned by the constant violence and suffering of billions of humans. Possession became commonplace, and those with latent psychic abilities often manifested their powers in destructive, uncontrolled ways. The psychic awakening of humanity that had begun during the late Dark Age of technology accelerated during Old Night, producing generations of untrained psychers who became both victims and vectors of warp influence. In some regions, these witches were hunted and burned by superstitious populations. In others, they were enslaved by warlords who used their powers as weapons or tools of divination. And in still others, the psychers themselves rose to power, forming witch covens that ruled through terror and manipulation. The Nephilim coven of the Akkadian zones claimed direct communion with entities they called the Undying, using their psychic abilities to animate the dead as a workforce and military. The Caucasus telepaths established a psychic oligarchy where non-psychic humans were reduced to little more than livestock, their minds regularly harvested for psychic sustenance. In the submerged ruins of Atlantis, the abyssal seers bred generations of water-breathing psychics who could project their consciousness through the ocean currents, creating a surveillance network that spanned the globe's poisoned seas. Not all psychic organizations were malevolent. The Order of the Sigillites, founded by individuals who would later be central to the Emperor's unification, preserved ancient knowledge through memorization techniques and psychic imprinting. The crystal astropaths of the Himalayan plateau attempted to maintain contact with human colonies among the stars, though their success was limited by the intensity of the warp storms. The Terran telepathic clade developed the first systematic methods for training and controlling psychic talents, techniques that would later form the foundation of the Imperial Scholastica Psychona. The fragmentation of Terra was not merely political or environmental, but cultural as well. Languages diverged into countless dialects and entirely new tongues. Historical knowledge became distorted through oral tradition or deliberately falsified by ruling castes to legitimize their authority. Ancient technologies were repurposed without understanding of their original function, leading to dangerous misuse and technological regression. Some techno-barbarian states maintained relatively high levels of technology, particularly those that had secured functioning STC systems or fragments thereof. The Albia Mechanicum Conclave, precursor to what would later join the Mechanicum of Mars, preserved considerable technical knowledge through a quasi-religious veneration of machine spirits. Their forged temples produced weapons and tools that, while crude by Dark Age standards, far outstripped the capabilities of most other Terran powers. The Indonesic block's biomechanical gardens created horrific cyborg organisms, by grafting mechanical components onto living subjects, producing terror weapons that haunted the nightmares of neighboring peoples. The North African conclaves maintained a fleet of atmospheric fighters using gravitic technology, allowing them to strike anywhere on the planet with impunity until their gene seed stocks became too degraded to produce new pilots compatible with their neural interface systems. Throughout this period of division and strife, countless minor powers rose and fell. City-states declared independence only to be absorbed by larger neighbors within generations. Nomadic raider cultures prowled the wastelands between settled regions, sometimes growing powerful enough to establish their own territories before inevitably fragmenting due to internal conflicts or external pressures. Religious movements sparked civil wars within established realms, leading to further balkanization. The Age of Strife on Terra lasted for nearly 5 millennia, a period longer than many of humanity's greatest civilizational achievements. Countless billions lived and died knowing nothing but the brutal struggle for survival in a world that had once been the center of a galactic civilization. Technological knowledge was lost and rediscovered in endless cycles, often distorted into unrecognizable forms. Genetic manipulation created human strains so divergent that they could barely be recognized as sharing a common ancestry. It was into this shattered world that the being who would later be known only as the Emperor emerged from obscurity. His origins remain deliberately obscured, but historical evidence suggests he had been observing and occasionally influencing human development for millennia before revealing himself. The Emperor had foreseen that humanity's only hope for survival lay in reunification, first of Terra, then of the scattered human worlds throughout the galaxy. But before he could launch his Great Crusade to reclaim the stars, he would need to reconquer the cradle of mankind. The stage was thus set for the Unification Wars, a series of brutal campaigns that would forge the disparate remnants of Terran civilization into the foundation of what would become the Imperium of Man. The techno-barbarian states, witch cults, and gene tyrants of old night would face an adversary unlike any they had encountered before, one with not only the technological and military might to challenge them, but a vision that extended far beyond the poisoned skies of ancient Terra. The first appearance of the Emperor as a public figure on Terra was not heralded by trumpets or proclamations, but by the sudden fall of the Khans of the Pan-Pacific region in the late 29th millennium. For centuries, these gene-enhanced warlords had ruled their territories with unquestioned authority, their armies of augmented soldiers crushing any resistance. Then, in the span of a single season, their fortresses fell one by one to a force that moved with preternatural speed and precision. Survivors spoke of a towering figure in simple armor who walked untouched through fusillades of energy weapons, whose gaze alone could make hardened warriors lay down their arms or burst into flames. The Emperor's base of operations emerged from the shattered plateau of the Himalayan mountains, in a region that had once been known as Nepal. There, among the reduced peaks that had once been the highest on Terra, he established the foundations of what would become the Imperial Palace. The location was strategic, a natural fortress with commanding views of the surrounding territories, defensible approaches, and access to deep underground chambers that predated even the Age of Strife. Some fragmentary records suggest these subterranean vaults contained ancient technologies and knowledge the Emperor had safeguarded for millennia. From this mountain stronghold, the Emperor launched his initial campaigns with a relatively small force of warriors. These were not the genetically enhanced legions Astartes that would come later, but rather mortal men and women who had pledged themselves to his vision. What they lacked in transhuman enhancements, they compensated for with fanatical devotion and surprisingly advanced weaponry, evidence that the Emperor had been gathering and preserving technological knowledge, while the rest of Terra descended into barbarism. The early unification forces utilized a distinctive combined arms approach that maximized the effectiveness of their limited numbers. Highly mobile strike teams would target enemy command structures and power sources, while larger formations engaged the main forces. The Emperor himself often led these decapitation strikes, his presence on the battlefield frequently enough to break enemy morale before a shot was fired. Those who did stand against him witnessed powers that seemed godlike to the techno-barbarians of Terra. The Emperor's psychic abilities manifested in myriad ways during these early conflicts. He could perceive events before they occurred, allowing him to position his forces with uncanny precision. Energy weapons directed at him would mysteriously malfunction or be deflected by invisible barriers. His mind could reach out to influence the thoughts of enemy leaders or even entire populations, sowing confusion or revealing the falsehoods their societies were built upon. When necessary, he could unleash devastating psychic attacks that reduced augmented warriors to ash or turned their own mutations against them. Perhaps most terrifying to his opponents was the Emperor's ability to strip away the delusions and false beliefs that had accumulated during the Age of Strife. Witch covens that had maintained power through psychic domination found their mental manipulations unraveled in his presence. Gene cults that worshipped their mutations as divine gifts were forced to confront the technological origins of their alterations. Techno-barbarian elites who had convinced their subjects of their invincibility were publicly defeated, their carefully constructed mythologies shattered. The conquest of the Indonesian bloc demonstrated the Emperor's tactical genius. Rather than engaging the bloc's vast armies directly, he targeted their system of cybernetic overseers. A series of precision strikes by small teams neutralized the control centers that maintained the neural links to the overseers, causing cascading failures throughout the bloc's command structure. As the overseers lost coherence, the brutally oppressed population rose up against their former masters. Within weeks, a domain that had stood for centuries collapsed from within, with minimal casualties among both the Unification forces and the civilian population. The Ursh campaigns showcased a different aspect of the Emperor's strategic approach. The weather control technologies that had made Ursh virtually unassailable were systematically neutralized through a combination of technological countermeasures and the Emperor's own psychic influence over the atmospheric conditions. Ursh warlords who had relied on creating artificial blizzards or toxic rain to defeat their enemies found their powers neutralized, their armies forced to fight on equal terms against the increasingly well-equipped Unification forces. The subjugation of the Nordic composite revealed the Emperor's understanding of cultural assimilation. Rather than attempting to eradicate the deeply ingrained gene cult beliefs, he redirected their religious fervor. The Emperor allowed himself to be identified with figures from their mythological pantheon, particularly those associated with wisdom and righteous warfare. The composite's chimeric warriors, who had fought ferociously against other Unification targets, gradually accepted the Emperor as the ultimate expression of their genetic ideals. Many were eventually incorporated into specialized Unification army units, their animal-derived enhancements proving useful in specific combat roles. Throughout these early campaigns, the Emperor began to articulate the philosophical foundations of what would become the imperial truth. This was not merely a pragmatic political position, but a comprehensive worldview that rejected superstition, embraced rational inquiry, and positioned humanity as the rightful inheritors of the galaxy. The Emperor understood that unifying Terra physically would be insufficient if its peoples remained ideologically fragmented, clinging to the mutated beliefs and cultural distortions that had developed during Old Night. The imperial truth was presented as a return to humanity's true path rather than a new ideology. The Emperor pointed to the achievements of the Dark Age of technology as evidence of what mankind could accomplish when freed from superstition and division. He systematically dismantled the religious and mystical beliefs that had proliferated during the Age of Strife, demonstrating how phenomena once attributed to gods or spirits were simply manifestations of natural laws or technologies that had been forgotten. Central to the Emperor's vision was the notion that humanity must guide its own evolution rather than being subject to it. The random mutations and gene manipulations that had created the bewildering variety of human strains on Terra were presented as dangerous aberrations rather than progress. The Emperor offered instead a controlled, directed form of human enhancement that would preserve the essential nature of humanity while elevating its capabilities. This philosophy would later find its ultimate expression in the creation of the Primarchs and Space Marines, but its roots were established during these early unification campaigns. The emperor's approach to compliance varied according to the nature of the opposition. Those techno-barbarian states that surrendered willingly were often allowed to maintain significant autonomy, their ruling classes incorporated into the emerging imperial administration if they proved adaptable to the new order. Those that resisted fiercely were dismantled completely, their territories reorganized under direct imperial control. In all cases, the emperor worked to identify and preserve useful technologies, knowledge, and human resources that could contribute to his broader goals. The Albia campaigns demonstrated this selective approach. The Albia Mechanicum Conclave, with its preservation of technical knowledge, was not destroyed, but rather absorbed largely intact into the emperor's growing technological apparatus. Their forged temples became early prototypes for what would later develop into the Terran branch of the Mechanicum, their tech adepts retaining many of their traditions while gradually accepting the emperor's authority. This pattern of incorporation rather than obliteration would later prove crucial in the alliance with Mars. As the Unification Wars progressed, the emperor began to reveal more of his long-term vision to his closest followers. Humanity, he explained, was at a crucial evolutionary juncture. The psychic potential that had begun to manifest in the species was both its greatest opportunity and its gravest threat. Without guidance, human psychers would continue to serve as unwitting gateways for warp entities, potentially triggering a catastrophic psychic awakening that could destroy the species entirely. Under his direction, however, this psychic evolution could be managed, creating a new human future free from the predations of the warp. This vision required not just the unification of Terra, but the reconquest of humanity's lost stellar domains. The Emperor spoke of the scattered human worlds across the galaxy, cut off from Terra during Old Night, developing in isolation and facing their own existential threats. Some had maintained high technology and relative stability, others had regressed to pre-industrial states or developed along bizarre cultural tangents. All would need to be brought back into the human fold if the species was to survive the coming challenges. To achieve this galactic reunification, the Emperor would need resources far beyond what Terra alone could provide. He would need vast fleets, armies of enhanced warriors capable of operating in any environment, and a logistical infrastructure spanning thousands of worlds. The conquest of Terra was thus not an end in itself, but the essential first step in a far grander design. Each techno-barbarian state that fell to the unification forces contributed materials, technology, and human capital to this growing enterprise. The Emperor's superhuman intellect allowed him to coordinate these complex, interlocking objectives with a precision that seemed supernatural to his followers. He could simultaneously direct military campaigns across multiple fronts, oversee research into recovered technologies, manage the integration of newly compliant territories, and continue his own secret projects deep within the Himalaysian fortress. This compartmentalized approach meant that few, if any, of his subordinates grasped the full scope of his plans until much later. As the Unification Wars expanded from the Himalaysian region to encompass more of Terra's surface, the Emperor began to gather the individuals who would form the core of his future administration. Some were military leaders who had proven their worth in battle. Others were administrators who had demonstrated unusual competence in managing the newly compliant territories, and still others were specialists in fields ranging from genetics to historical archiving. Among these early recruits were figures who would later become legendary in the Imperium's history: Constantin Valdor, Malkador the Sigillite, and the geneticist Amr Astardi. The Emperor's revelation to Terra was not a single event, but a process that unfolded over decades of conflict and consolidation. To some, he appeared as a conqueror, to others a liberator, to still others a visionary offering escape from the cycles of violence and degeneration that had gripped humanity for millennia. What remained consistent throughout was his absolute conviction that mankind must be unified under his leadership if it was to survive the challenges ahead, challenges that he, with his unique perspective spanning thousands of years of human history, could see with terrible clarity. As the Emperor's campaign of unification gained momentum across Terra's fractured landscape, it became evident that his small cadre of devoted but unaugmented human warriors would not suffice against the more formidable techno-barbarian states. The conquest of lesser domains had provided crucial resources and territory, but the greater challenges of subjugating powers like the Pan-Pacific Empire or the Ursh Dominion demanded warriors who could match and exceed the gene-crafted soldiers fielded by these regimes. This necessity birthed humanity's first true super-soldiers, the Thunder Warriors. The Thunder Warriors represented the Emperor's first major foray into transhuman engineering, created in carefully hidden gene laboratories beneath the Himalayan fortress. Unlike later space marine programs that would prioritize standardization and longevity, the Thunder Warriors were designed with a singular focus: overwhelming combat effectiveness in the immediate term. The Emperor, drawing upon millennia of accumulated knowledge in human genetics, created these warriors through aggressive augmentation procedures performed on adult male subjects, selected primarily from the hardy populations of the Himalayan highlands and the northern Atlan regions. The physical transformation of a Thunder Warrior recruit was far more brutal than the relatively refined process later developed for the Astartes. Augmentation occurred through a combination of surgical implantation, chemical infusion, and psycho-conditioning that killed approximately 70% of candidates. Those who survived emerged as hulking warriors standing nearly 3 meters tall, with massively enhanced musculature, thickened bone structure, and redundant organ systems that rendered them virtually immune to conventional injuries. The Thunder Warriors' physical capabilities exceeded even those of the later Space Marines in raw combat potential. Their enhanced strength allowed them to tear through armored bulkheads with their bare hands, while their speed enabled them to cross battlefields in explosive bursts that appeared as little more than blurs to unaugmented human eyes. Their pain thresholds were elevated to such extremes that they could continue fighting effectively, even with catastrophic injuries that would immediately incapacitate or kill normal humans. The most distinctive enhancements of the Thunder Warriors manifested in their combat performance. Their neurological modifications created heightened aggression and combat instincts that transformed them into perfect killing machines on the battlefield. When engaged in combat, Thunder Warriors entered states of controlled battle rage that further enhanced their already formidable physical abilities. Their genetic augmentations included specialized adrenal glands that could flood their systems with combat stimulants, temporarily boosting their strength and speed to even more extreme levels during critical moments in battle. Their armor, while primitive compared to later Astartes power armor, was nonetheless far advanced beyond anything fielded by the techno-barbarian states. Constructed from layered ceramite plates over a powered exoskeleton, Thunder Warrior armor provided exceptional protection while enhancing the wearer's already formidable strength. The armor's most distinctive feature was the elaborate lightning motif etched into its surface and the tall, crested helmets that added to the warrior's already imposing stature. This imagery was not merely decorative but psychological, designed to evoke ancient Terran symbols of power and divine retribution. The standard armament of a Thunder Warrior reflected their role as shock troops. Their primary weapons were massive bolters, fully automatic rocket-propelled grenade launchers that could reduce enemy formations to bloody ruin in seconds. For close combat, they wielded power weapons ranging from massive mauls to lightning claws, energized with disruptor fields that could shear through the most advanced armor of the Age of Strife. Some Thunder Warrior cadres specialized in flamers and other area denial weapons, particularly useful in the claustrophobic hive cities and underground complexes that characterized much of Terra's urbanized landscape. Despite their incredible battlefield prowess, the Thunder Warriors suffered from severe limitations that ultimately rendered them unsuitable for the Emperor's long-term plans. Their genetic augmentations, while potent, were fundamentally unstable. Most Thunder Warriors experienced accelerated cellular degeneration that manifested in symptoms ranging from chronic pain to full psychotic episodes. Their enhanced metabolisms burned so intensely that their lifespans were dramatically shortened, with few expected to live more than a decade or two after their creation. Their neural architecture, optimized for combat aggression, made them prone to uncontrollable rages even outside battlefield conditions. The organization of the Thunder Warrior forces reflected both their specialized nature and the Emperor's awareness of their limitations. Unlike the later legions Astartes with their complex hierarchical structures, the Thunder Warriors were organized into simple, tactical formations called primus, units of approximately 100 warriors each. These units were typically assigned to specific campaign theaters rather than operating as a unified force, allowing the Emperor to deploy their overwhelming combat potential precisely where needed while minimizing the risks associated with their instability. Among the Thunder Warriors, certain individuals distinguished themselves through exceptional service or abilities. Chief among these was Eric Tyrannes, known as the Lightning Bearer, who served as the de facto leader of the Thunder Warrior forces. Tyrannes stood apart from his fellow warriors in both physical stature and mental stability, standing taller than even his enhanced brethren, with piercing eyes that betrayed an intelligence unusual among the Thunder Warriors. Tyrannes possessed a tactical acumen that complemented his devastating combat abilities. Tyrannes earned his epithet, the Lightning Bearer, during the Battle of Mount Narodnia, where he personally led the assault against the Gene cult fortress that had resisted conventional attacks for years. Wielding a massive power maul later known as Thunderhead, Tyrannes broke through the main gate alone before his fellow warriors could even reach the walls. Survivors of the cult spoke of him as a figure wreathed in electrical discharges that seemed to extend from his weapon to engulf his entire body, giving rise to his legendary name. The Lightning Bearer's most significant contribution to the Unification Wars came during the campaign against the Nordafric conclaves. The conclave's gene-crafted aerial forces had stymied Imperial advances for months, using their gravitic technology to strike at ground forces with impunity. Tyrannes developed specialized Thunder Warrior assault tactics that utilized grav chutes and limited flight packs to transform the traditionally ground-based warriors into an impromptu aerial assault force. The resulting Battle of the Crimson Sky became one of the most celebrated victories of the early Unification period. Other notable Thunder Warriors included Goda, whose physical size and strength were exceptional even by Thunder Warrior standards. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, Goda specialized in wielding weapons too massive for even his fellow enhanced warriors to use effectively. His signature weapon, a power hammer called Worldbreaker, could shatter reinforced bunkers with a single blow. Goda's battlefield role typically involved breaching enemy fortifications that would otherwise require heavy artillery to reduce. The 9th Primus unit, commanded by a Thunder Warrior known only as Usurian, gained renown for their specialized urban warfare techniques. Operating primarily in the sprawling hive complexes of the former European territories, the 9th developed tactics for clearing the labyrinthine urban environments that characterized much of Terra's surface. Their methodical room-by-room clearing operations were less spectacular than the open field battles fought by other Thunder Warrior units, but no less crucial to the unification effort. The Thunder Warriors' first major deployment came during the campaign against the Ethnarchy of the Caucasus Wastes. The Ethnarchy had maintained its independence through control of Terra's last major functioning fusion generators, using the threat of energy deprivation to deter potential conquerors. The Emperor deployed 5 Primus units of Thunder Warriors in a lightning strike against the Ethnarchy's central power distribution nexus. The battle lasted less than 6 hours, with the Thunder Warriors suffering minimal casualties while completely dismantling the Ethnarchy's defensive forces. This victory established the pattern that would characterize Thunder Warrior deployments throughout the Unification Wars. Rather than serving as frontline troops in protracted campaigns, they functioned as the Emperor's strategic shock weapon, deployed specifically to break enemy formations that conventional forces could not overcome. After the Thunder Warriors shattered an enemy's main strength, conventional Imperial Army units would move in to secure territory and manage the transition to Imperial compliance. The campaign against the Terrawat clan demonstrated this approach perfectly. The clan's control of energy resources had made them virtually untouchable, as they could simply cut power to any region that threatened them. the Emperor launched a multi-pronged assault with Thunder Warrior units targeting each of the clan's 7 primary generator complexes simultaneously. The coordination and timing were immaculate. Each facility fell within minutes of the others, giving the clan no opportunity to implement their scorched earth protocols that would have destroyed the generators rather than allowing them to fall into enemy hands. Despite their battlefield successes, the inherent flaws in the Thunder Warriors' creation became increasingly apparent as the Unification Wars progressed. The cellular degeneration afflicting them accelerated under the stress of constant combat, causing warriors who had been unstoppable in earlier campaigns to suddenly collapse from massive organ failure or suffer psychotic breaks that rendered them dangers to allies and enemies alike. The Emperor and his gene rights worked continuously to develop treatments that might stabilize the Thunder Warriors, but these efforts achieved only temporary results at best. By the later stages of the Unification Wars, the Emperor had already begun development of the Primarch Project and the subsequent Astartes legions that would succeed the Thunder Warriors. The new generation of enhanced warriors would sacrifice some of the raw combat power that characterized the Thunder Warriors in exchange for vastly improved stability, longevity, and psychological balance. This transition was necessitated not only by the Thunder Warriors' physical limitations, but also by the Emperor's expanding vision for humanity's future, a vision that required warriors capable of functioning as more than just implements of destruction. The final major deployment of the Thunder Warriors came during the Battle of Mount Ararat, where the last significant techno-barbarian alliance made their stand against Imperial forces. The alliance had assembled a formidable army combining the remnants of several previously defeated powers, including elements of the Pan-Pacific forces, Ursh heavy infantry, and Nord-Afric aerial units. Their defensive position atop Mount Ararat, with its ancient fortifications enhanced by recovered technology, presented a formidable challenge even to Imperial forces that had grown accustomed to victory. The Emperor committed nearly all remaining functional Thunder Warrior units to this battle, approximately 20 Primus formations comprising roughly 2,000 warriors. The assault began at dawn, with Thunder Warriors ascending the mountain from all sides simultaneously, engaging enemy forces along a front that stretched nearly 30 kilometers. The battle raged for a full day and night, with the Thunder Warriors gradually pushing the defenders back toward the summit fortress despite taking significant casualties. By the following dawn, the Thunder Warriors had broken through to the central fortress and eliminated the Alliance leadership, effectively ending organized resistance to unification on Terra. The victory was total, with Imperial forces capturing vast stockpiles of weapons, technology, and other resources that would prove invaluable in the Emperor's future plans. For the Thunder Warriors, it represented their finest hour, the culmination of their purpose as the Emperor's first transhuman warriors. What happened after Mount Ararat remains one of the most controversial episodes in early Imperial history. Official records state that the remaining Thunder Warriors died gloriously in the final assault, their bodies broken by their final exertions in service to the Emperor. This account became the foundation of Imperial propaganda, celebrating the Thunder Warriors as noble sacrifices on the altar of unification, warriors who had served their purpose and passed into legend, making way for the superior Astartes who would carry the Emperor's vision to the stars. The Pan-Pacific Empire stood as one of the most formidable obstacles to the Emperor's unification campaign. Unlike many of the fractured techno-barbarian states that had fallen before the Thunder Warriors' onslaught, the Pan-Pacific Empire boasted a cohesive military structure, advanced technology, and control over vast resources spanning what had once been the Pacific Rim nations. Their floating fortress cities dotted the toxic oceans, connected by submersible transport networks, and defended by sophisticated weapons systems that had kept rivals at bay for centuries. The Emperor's strategic assessment of the Pan-Pacific Empire revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities. Their naval supremacy was unquestioned. Fusion-powered aircraft carriers and submarine installations gave them mobility and striking power that land-bound forces struggled to counter. Their ruling council of genetically enhanced admirals had maintained a strict meritocracy among their officer corps, ensuring competent leadership throughout their chain of command. Most concerning was their mastery of certain Dark Age technologies, particularly in the realms of weather control and gravitational manipulation, which they employed for both defensive and offensive purposes. However, the Pan-Pacific Empire suffered from critical weaknesses that the Emperor identified with characteristic precision. Their dependence on oceanic resources made them vulnerable to disruption of their harvesting operations. Their technological superiority had bred complacency, with defensive systems optimized against conventional attacks rather than the specialized forces the Emperor had developed. Most significantly, their political structure relied on a delicate balance of power between the Admiral Lords, with simmering rivalries that could be exploited by a sufficiently subtle opponent. Rather than launching a direct assault against the Empire's naval forces, where they held every advantage, the Emperor chose to approach the conflict through diplomatic means first. He dispatched envoys to the Indonesian bloc, a continental power that had long maintained an uneasy peace with the Pan-Pacific Empire. The bloc controlled crucial rare earth mineral deposits and agricultural zones that the Empire relied upon for maintaining their advanced technology. Though the Indonesian leadership was initially suspicious of imperial overtures, the Emperor's representatives offered something the bloc had coveted for generations: a technological edge against their oceanic rivals. The alliance was formalized in the Treaty of Malang, which granted the Imperium access to the Indonesian bloc's resources in exchange for imperial military support and technological assistance. The treaty included provisions for eventual integration of the bloc into the Imperium, but with guarantees of autonomy that appeased the Indonesian ruling council. This diplomatic coup achieved two critical objectives simultaneously. It secured resources needed for the Emperor's growing forces and created a continental base of operations from which to launch the campaign against the Pan-Pacific Empire. The Pan-Pacific admirals recognized the threat this alliance posed and responded with characteristic aggression. Their first strike targeted Indonesian coastal installations, using submersible weapons platforms to launch devastating bombardments against mineral processing facilities. The attack achieved tactical surprise but failed strategically. The Emperor had anticipated this response and positioned imperial defensive systems that limited the damage while revealing key aspects of Pan-Pacific offensive capabilities. The Emperor's counter-strategy unfolded in three coordinated phases. The first phase, Operation Literal Denial, focused on neutralizing the Empire's ability to project power onto continental coastlines. Specialized Imperial units equipped with portable void shield generators established defensive perimeters around critical coastal infrastructure. These shields, derived from Dark Age technology the Emperor had preserved, could withstand the Empire's most powerful ship-based weapons. When the Pan-Pacific forces committed to a second, larger assault against these positions, they found their munitions expended against targets they could not damage, while exposing their vessels to counter battery fire from concealed Imperial positions. The second phase targeted the Empire's resource-gathering operations. The Pan-Pacific Empire maintained vast underwater harvesting complexes that extracted minerals, cultivated algae farms for food production, and processed the toxic ocean water into usable forms. Imperial forces deployed specialized submersible units, not Thunder Warriors, who were ill-suited for aquatic operations, but human operatives equipped with advanced underwater combat gear. These depth hunters, as they became known, conducted surgical strikes against key underwater infrastructure, crippling the Empire's resource chain without directly engaging their superior naval forces. The most innovative aspect of this underwater campaign was the Emperor's use of genetically modified marine organisms as weapons platforms. Imperial biology's adepts had created large, cybernetically enhanced cetaceans capable of carrying demolition charges or serving as stealth transport for depth hunter teams. These creatures could navigate the toxic oceans without life support systems and were virtually undetectable by conventional sonar systems calibrated to identify mechanical submersibles. The psychological impact of these biological weapons was profound. Pan-Pacific naval personnel reported sea monsters attacking their installations, creating a climate of fear that conventional weapons could not have achieved. The third phase of the Emperor's strategy involved direct action against the Empire's command structure. Through intelligence gathered by both Indonesian sources and his own psychic foresight, the Emperor identified critical rifts among the Admiral Lords. The most significant division existed between Admiral Nemo, whose power base centered on the northern Pacific territories, and Admiral Zheng, who controlled the western Pacific regions. Both harbored ambitions to rule the entire empire, kept in check only by the balance of power among the council. Imperial operatives made contact with Admiral Nemo, offering him technological advantages that would tip the balance in his favor against his rivals. The offer was a carefully crafted deception. The technology provided was subtly flawed, designed to fail catastrophically when deployed at scale. When Nemo launched his coup against the Admiral Council, his forces initially gained advantage before their systems failed, leaving them vulnerable to counterattack. The resulting civil conflict consumed nearly half of the Empire's military resources before either side realized they had been manipulated. With the Pan-Pacific Empire weakened by internal conflict, the Emperor launched the decisive phase of the campaign. Imperial forces, now including several Primus units of Thunder Warriors, struck directly at the Empire's primary floating fortress city, Pacifica Prime. This massive structure, essentially a floating island constructed from interconnected platforms and decommissioned vessels, served as both the administrative center of the Empire and its primary shipbuilding facility. The assault began with a precision strike by aircraft launched from Indonesian territory, targeting the fortress city's defensive systems rather than causing general destruction. As the aerial bombardment concluded, aquatic landing craft delivered Thunder Warriors directly onto the outer platforms of Pacifica Prime. The Warriors, while not designed for naval operations, proved devastatingly effective in the close-quarters environment of the fortress city. Their enhanced strength allowed them to tear through bulkheads and sealed compartments, while their resilience made them nearly impervious to the toxic atmospheric conditions that occasionally breached the city's environmental systems. The Pan-Pacific defenders, accustomed to repelling conventional boarding actions, found their tactics ineffective against the transhuman physiology and combat doctrines of the Thunder Warriors. The battle for Pacifica Prime lasted 3 days, with Imperial forces systematically capturing key systems and command nodes rather than simply destroying them. This approach reflected the Emperor's recognition of the technological value represented by the fortress city. The Pan-Pacific Empire had maintained certain manufacturing capabilities lost elsewhere on Terra, particularly in the production of graviton impellers and atmospheric processors. These technologies would prove invaluable for the Emperor's future plans, making their preservation a strategic priority. Admiral Zheng, the last surviving member of the Admiral Council, attempted a final desperate defense in the central command spire of Pacifica Prime. He activated an ancient weapon system that manipulated gravitational fields, intending to crush the invading forces. The system, however, had been compromised by Imperial tech adepts who had infiltrated the maintenance crews. Rather than targeting the Imperial forces, the gravitational effect was redirected against the command spire itself, crushing it and eliminating the last organized resistance. With Pacifica Prime secured, the remaining Pan-Pacific territories faced a choice: submit to Imperial authority or face similar assaults against their own installations. Most chose submission, recognizing the inevitability of Imperial victory. Those that resisted were dealt with methodically, with the Emperor's forces now augmented by vessels and weapons captured from Pacifica Prime. Within 2 months, the entire Pan-Pacific Empire had been incorporated into the expanding Imperium. The conquest of the Pan-Pacific Empire yielded technological treasures beyond what the Emperor had initially anticipated. The floating fortress cities contained intact STC fragments for marine propulsion systems and water purification technologies that had been lost elsewhere. The Empire's submarine installations housed advanced sonar and pressure-resistant systems that would later be adapted for void ship components. Perhaps most valuable were their atmospheric processors, machines capable of extracting breathable air from Terra's toxic atmosphere with unprecedented efficiency. These would prove crucial in the Emperor's efforts to begin the long process of restoring Terra's environment. The human resources acquired were equally valuable. The Pan-Pacific Empire had maintained higher educational standards than most techno-barbarian states, producing generations of skilled engineers, navigators, and scientists. These individuals were systematically evaluated and integrated into the imperial hierarchy according to their abilities. Many former Pan-Pacific naval officers were recruited into what would become the early Imperial Navy, their experience with fleet operations proving invaluable as the Emperor began to look beyond Terra to the stars. The alliance with the Indonesic bloc, which had been crucial to the campaign's success, underwent its own evolution following the Pan-Pacific conquest. The bloc's leadership had observed the fate of the Empire with growing concern, recognizing that their own autonomy might be similarly threatened. Their response was to accelerate their integration into the Imperium on their own terms, offering complete compliance in exchange for maintaining certain cultural and administrative practices. The Emperor, pragmatic as always, accepted these terms while gradually introducing imperial institutions that would eventually supplant the bloc's original power structures. The resource wealth of the Indonesic territories proved essential to the Emperor's expanding ambitions. Their rare earth mineral deposits provided materials necessary for the construction of advanced weapons and void ship components. Their agricultural zones, protected from the worst of Terra's environmental degradation, produced food supplies that sustained the growing imperial forces. Most significantly, their population centers provided recruitment pools for both conventional military forces and candidates for the early Astartes programs that were beginning to replace the Thunder Warriors. The combined industrial capacity of the former Pan-Pacific Empire and Indonesic bloc created a manufacturing base that accelerated the Emperor's timetable considerably. Shipyards that had once produced ocean-going vessels were converted to construct components for void ships. Weapons factories that had supplied the endless conflicts between the two powers were retooled to produce the standardized equipment that would outfit the Imperial Army. Research facilities that had focused on oceanic technologies were redirected toward the challenges of void travel and colonization. The conquest of the Pacific region fundamentally altered the balance of power on Terra. With control of both the former Pan-Pacific Empire and the Indonesic bloc, the Emperor commanded resources and territories that dwarfed any remaining techno-barbarian state. The manufacturing capabilities acquired allowed for mass production of advanced weapons and equipment, creating a qualitative advantage that complemented the already significant quantitative superiority of the imperial forces. The technological knowledge recovered accelerated research programs in everything from void ship propulsion to atmospheric reclamation. Perhaps most significantly, the Pacific Campaign demonstrated the Emperor's strategic flexibility. Unlike the straightforward application of overwhelming force that had characterized many earlier unification battles, the conquest of the Pan-Pacific Empire showcased sophisticated combined arms operations, diplomatic maneuvering, psychological warfare, and targeted preservation of valuable assets. This multifaceted approach would become the template for later imperial compliance actions during the Great Crusade, where the goal was not simply conquest, but the integration of human worlds into a cohesive whole. The lessons learned in the aquatic warfare against the Pan-Pacific Empire would later inform imperial tactics against a variety of non-standard opponents. The experience gained fighting in toxic environments proved valuable when confronting worlds with hostile atmospheres. The techniques developed for assaulting floating fortress cities were adapted for void station boarding actions. The specialized equipment created for depth hunters became the basis for void-capable boarding torpedoes and assault craft that would serve the Imperium for millennia to come. The conquest of the Pan-Pacific Empire had secured the Emperor vital resources and manufacturing capabilities, but true technological dominance remained beyond his grasp, as long as the Terawatt clan maintained their iron grip on Terra's remaining power infrastructure. Unlike other techno-barbarian states that ruled through military might or genetic manipulation, the Terawatt clan's power stemmed from something far more fundamental: energy production. Their control of the last functioning fusion generators on Terra gave them leverage that even the Emperor's growing forces could not easily overcome. The Terawatt holdings centered around what had once been the Caucasus Mountains, now transformed into a sprawling complex of generator facilities, research installations, and heavily fortified administrative centers. Massive cooling towers dominated the landscape, their silhouettes visible for hundreds of kilometers through Terra's perpetually hazy atmosphere. Deep beneath the surface, the actual fusion reactors hummed with barely contained power, maintained by generations of tech priests whose knowledge had been preserved through careful apprenticeship systems rather than written documentation. The Emperor recognized that a direct military assault on the Terawatt facilities would be catastrophic. Even if his forces prevailed, damage to the generators could plunge large portions of Terra into darkness for decades. Such an outcome would severely impede his plans for rebuilding humanity's birthworld and launching the Great Crusade. Instead, he opted for a diplomatic approach that would showcase his greatest weapon, not the Thunder Warriors or advanced technology, but his unparalleled intellect and foresight. Initial contact with the Terawatt clan came through intermediaries, imperial envoys bearing gifts of rare materials salvaged from Pan-Pacific stockpiles. These preliminary exchanges established communication channels, but achieved little substantive progress. The clan's ruling council, a collection of generator lords who had maintained their independence throughout the Age of Strife, remained skeptical of the Emperor's intentions. They had observed his methodical conquest of other techno-barbarian states and feared they would simply be the next to fall. The Emperor's breakthrough came when he personally decoded portions of an ancient technical manual recovered from the Albia Mechanicum archives. This document contained maintenance protocols for the specific model of fusion generators operated by the Terawatt clan, information that had been lost even to the clan's senior tech priests. Rather than using this knowledge as leverage, the Emperor offered it freely, demonstrating both his technical expertise and his genuine interest in preserving and enhancing the generators rather than simply seizing them. This gesture opened the door to a direct meeting between the Emperor and the Terawatt ruling council. The summit took place at Generator Prime, the oldest and largest of the Terawatt facilities. The Emperor arrived with a minimal escort, just 3 of his custodians and Malkador the Sigillite, a calculated show of respect that impressed the security-conscious generator lords. What followed was not a negotiation in the traditional sense, but a technical conference where the Emperor displayed knowledge of energy systems that astonished even the most experienced Terawatt engineers. For 14 days, the Emperor worked alongside Terawatt technicians, personally recalibrating systems that had been operating at reduced efficiency for centuries. He sketched designs for improved cooling systems that would increase output by nearly 30% while reducing the strain on aging components. He demonstrated techniques for purifying the hydrogen fuel that eliminated impurities the clan had never been able to detect with their equipment. Most impressively, he diagnosed and repaired a critical flaw in Generator Prime's containment field that had been slowly deteriorating and might have eventually led to a catastrophic failure. These technical contributions established the Emperor's credibility in a way no military conquest could have achieved. The Generator Lords, pragmatic technocrats at heart, recognized that alliance with the Emperor offered benefits that independence could not. Their facilities were operating beyond their design lifespans, and despite their best efforts, the knowledge needed for true maintenance and expansion had been eroding with each generation. The Emperor not only possessed this knowledge, but demonstrated the ability to improve upon the original designs. The formal alliance between the Imperium and the Terawatt clan was codified in the Treaty of Generator Prime. Its terms were remarkably favorable to the clan, granting them considerable autonomy within the imperial framework and guaranteeing their continued oversight of the generator facilities. In return, they pledged their energy production to the Emperor's unification efforts and agreed to train Imperial technicians in the basics of fusion technology. This arrangement preserved the clan's status while integrating them into the Emperor's growing administrative structure. With Terra's primary energy infrastructure secured, the Emperor turned his attention to a far greater prize, Mars. The Red Planet had weathered the Age of Strife differently than Terra. While Earth had fragmented into warring techno-barbarian states, Mars had maintained a more cohesive civilization centered around the worship of technology. The Mechanicum, as they called themselves, had preserved vast repositories of Dark Age knowledge that would be crucial for the Emperor's plans to reclaim the stars. Mars, however, remained effectively independent, separated from Terra by more than just physical distance. The Mechanicum had developed its own distinct culture and religious practices, venerating technology as manifestations of the machine god, or Omnissiah. Their society operated under the direction of the Fabricator General and a council of archmagos, with a complex hierarchy of tech priests maintaining both technological knowledge and religious orthodoxy. Any attempt to forcibly bring Mars under Terran control would likely result in the destruction of the very knowledge and manufacturing capabilities the Emperor sought. The Emperor's approach to Mars demonstrated his unparalleled strategic patience. Rather than immediately pressing for alliance after securing the Terrawat clan, he spent nearly a year consolidating his position on Terra and gathering intelligence about Martian political factions. Through this careful preparation, he identified both potential allies and obstacles within the Mechanicum hierarchy. Most significantly, he recognized the theological opening that would allow for peaceful integration, the Mechanicum's belief in the Omnissiah, a physical avatar of their machine god who would one day appear to lead them to perfection. The Emperor's expedition to Mars was meticulously planned to exploit this belief. His vessel, a massive crawler designed to traverse the Martian surface, was constructed using recovered STC patterns and incorporated technologies that the Mechanicum would immediately recognize as authentic Dark Age designs rather than pale imitations. His entourage included not only military protection, but also the finest technical minds from the Terrawat clan and the former Pan-Pacific Empire's research divisions. Most importantly, he brought with him technological gifts of incalculable value, intact STC templates that had been preserved in his secret vaults throughout the Age of Strife. The landing site chosen was the Olympus Mons, the massive shield volcano that housed the Mechanicum's primary temple complex. This location held both practical and symbolic significance. It was the seat of the Fabricator General's power and the most sacred site in Mechanicum theology. By approaching directly rather than establishing a base elsewhere on Mars, the Emperor signaled both confidence and respect for Mechanicum traditions. The first meeting between the Emperor and the Fabricator General was witnessed by hundreds of senior tech priests who had gathered to observe the mysterious visitor from Terra. The Emperor, understanding the theatricality required for the occasion, arrived in a suit of armor that incorporated technologies even the Mechanicum had lost: microscopic force field generators, self-repairing circuitry, and power systems that seemed to function without conventional energy sources. His physical presence, towering over even the most heavily augmented tech priests, radiating both power and perfect technological symmetry, created an immediate impression that aligned perfectly with Mechanicum prophecies about the Omnissiah. Rather than immediately declaring himself the Omnissiah, however, the Emperor engaged the Fabricator General in technical discussions that demonstrated his comprehensive understanding of Mechanicum technology and theology. He spoke of the machine god in terms that resonated with Mechanicum beliefs, while subtly recontextualizing them within his broader vision for humanity. He acknowledged the Mechanicum's achievements in preserving knowledge through the Age of Strife, while offering glimpses of technologies they had lost, technologies he could help them recover. The centerpiece of these discussions was the Emperor's presentation of an intact STC template for the Land Raider. This combat vehicle design had been partially preserved in Mechanicum archives, but with critical components and systems missing. The Emperor's template was complete, providing not only the full specifications, but the underlying principles that would allow for adaptation and improvement. This gift alone would have secured the Mechanicum's interest, but it was merely the first of several technological treasures the Emperor had brought. The negotiations extended over several weeks, with the Emperor meeting different factions within the Mechanicum hierarchy. To the Genitors, he offered forgotten techniques for stabilizing biological augmentations. To the Lex Mechanics, he provided cipher keys that unlocked data archives that had been inaccessible for millennia. To the Myrmidons, he demonstrated weapons technologies that merged biological and mechanical systems in ways they had theorized but never successfully implemented. Each gift was carefully chosen to appeal to specific factions while advancing the Emperor's ultimate goal of alliance. The most delicate aspect of these negotiations concerned the religious nature of the Mechanicum. The Emperor's vision for humanity, the imperial truth, explicitly rejected superstition and religious worship. The Mechanicum's entire society, however, was structured around the veneration of the machine god and the Omnissiah. This fundamental contradiction threatened to derail the alliance before it could be formalized. The Emperor's solution displayed his pragmatic flexibility. Rather than demanding the Mechanicum abandon their beliefs, he allowed himself to be identified with the Omnissiah, not through explicit claim, but through careful implication and demonstration of abilities that matched their prophecies. This theological compromise permitted the Mechanicum to maintain their religious practices while aligning them with imperial objectives. The Emperor rationalized this exception to the imperial truth as a necessary accommodation that would eventually evolve as the Mechanicum became more integrated with the broader Imperium. The Treaty of Olympus Mons, signed in the shadow of the massive volcano, formalized the alliance between Terra and Mars. Its provisions established the Mechanicum as a semi-autonomous organization within the Imperium, responsible for technological development, manufacturing, and maintenance. The Fabricator General would retain authority over internal Mechanicum affairs while acknowledging the Emperor's ultimate sovereignty. Mars would provide technical support for the Emperor's military forces, including the production of weapons, vehicles, and void ships needed for the planned Great Crusade. In return, the Emperor guaranteed the Mechanicum exclusive rights to certain technologies and first access to any archaeotech discovered during the reconquest of human worlds. He pledged protection for forge worlds that would be established as the Imperium expanded, ensuring the Mechanicum could extend its reach alongside the military conquest. Perhaps most significantly, he granted the Mechanicum a degree of religious freedom not extended to other imperial organizations, the right to continue their worship of the machine god with the understanding that the Emperor was the Omnissiah incarnate. The practical benefits of this alliance manifested almost immediately. Martian forge complexes began producing standardized equipment for imperial forces at a scale that Terran manufacturing could never have achieved. Mechanicum tech priests joined expeditions to recover technology from ruins across Terra, their specialized knowledge allowing for the salvage of systems that would otherwise have been destroyed. Most importantly, work began on the massive void ships that would carry the Emperor's forces beyond the Sol system once Terra was fully unified. The Mars-Terra alliance transformed the Emperor's unification campaign from a planetary conquest to the foundation of an interplanetary empire. With the industrial might of Mars and the energy resources of the Terrawat clan, the Emperor now possessed the infrastructure needed to support his most ambitious projects, the creation of the Primarchs and the legions Astartes, who would serve as the spearhead of the Great Crusade. The technological foundation had been laid for humanity's return to the stars, not as fragmented colonies, but as a unified imperium with the power to reclaim its lost dominion. The conquest of the Terrawat clan and the alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars had secured the Emperor's technological base, but vast territories of Terra remained outside imperial control. Among these, the frozen wastes of the Nordic territories and the gene-twisted jungles of Sudamerica presented unique challenges that would require adaptation of the Emperor's military doctrine and unification strategies. The Nordic regions had once been the northern reaches of the European continent and Scandia, but millennia of climate manipulation during the Age of Strife had transformed them into a perpetual winter realm. The collapse of ancient weather control systems had triggered an uncontrolled cooling effect, creating an ice-bound territory where only the hardiest humans could survive. Those who did endure had adapted both culturally and genetically, developing into the fearsome Nordic composite, a confederation of gene-enhanced warrior clans who worshiped their mutations as divine gifts from ancient gods. Imperial intelligence gathered by Malcador's operatives revealed that the Nordic power structure centered around massive fortress cities carved directly into glaciers and mountain ranges. These frost keeps housed populations ranging from 50,000 to several million inhabitants, with the largest, Uppsala, serving as the de facto capital of the composite. Each frost keep maintained near complete self-sufficiency through geothermal energy tapped from deep beneath the ice and specialized hydroponic cultivation chambers that produced nutrient-dense algae and fungal matter. The Nordic warriors themselves presented a formidable obstacle to imperial compliance. Standing nearly as tall as unaugmented thunder warriors, with pale blue skin and enhanced musculature adapted for the extreme cold, they wielded weapons fashioned from rare metals mined from beneath the ice. Their signature armaments were thermal inverse blades that absorbed heat from whatever they cut, causing flash freezing in addition to physical damage. Their defensive capabilities were equally concerning. Many Nordic elites had undergone genetic modifications that allowed them to generate localized cold fields, freezing moisture from the air to create spontaneous ice barriers or weapons. The Emperor's initial approach to the Nordic campaign emphasized reconnaissance rather than immediate engagement. Specialized scout units equipped with thermal camouflage infiltrated the territories surrounding the major frost keeps, mapping approach routes and identifying potential weaknesses. These scouts discovered that despite their fearsome reputation, the Nordic forces suffered from limited mobility outside their fortress cities. The extreme cold and treacherous terrain of the glacial wastes restricted large-scale troop movements, forcing them to rely on established routes that could be monitored and potentially interdicted. The first direct imperial action targeted not the frost keeps themselves, but the geothermal taps that provided their energy. Strike teams composed of mechanized infantry, supported by specialized cold-adapted tanks, severed the exposed portions of these energy conduits at strategic points, disrupting power to outlying defensive systems. Rather than completely destroying these facilities, Imperial engineers installed regulation devices that allowed them to control energy flow, demonstrating to the Nordic population that the Emperor could either sustain or deprive them of warmth and light at will. This approach created the first fractures in Nordic unity. The smaller frost keeps, facing the prospect of freezing in the perpetual darkness, began to negotiate separate compliance agreements with imperial representatives. These early defections provided the Emperor's forces with invaluable intelligence about Nordic defensive systems and the layout of the larger fortress cities that remained defiant. The Thunder Warriors, while formidable, proved poorly suited to the extended cold weather operations required for the Nordic campaign. Their accelerated metabolisms burned through energy reserves too quickly in the sub-zero temperatures, and their armor systems had not been designed for such extreme environmental conditions. Instead, the Emperor deployed specialized units of the Imperial Army, equipped with thermal-regulated power armor, adapted from designs provided by the Mechanicum. These troops, while not transhuman, could operate effectively in the freezing conditions for extended periods. The assault on Uppsala, the greatest of the frost keeps, demonstrated the Emperor's tactical flexibility. Rather than a frontal assault against the heavily fortified main gates, Imperial forces utilized thermal drilling vehicles to create access tunnels through the surrounding ice fields. These tunnels emerged inside the fortress city's defensive perimeter, allowing strike teams to neutralize key systems from within. Simultaneously, airborne units equipped with grav chutes descended from the upper atmosphere onto the fortress's highest levels, capturing the geothermal control centers before defenders could implement scorched earth protocols. The Jarl of Uppsala, a giant even by Nordic standards who had undergone extensive genetic modification, personally led the counter-attack against Imperial forces. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, with skin that had been modified to generate ice crystals as a form of living armor, he wielded a massive thermal inverse axe that could freeze the moisture in a human body with a single strike. Imperial records indicate that he personally slew over 40 Imperial army troops before being confronted by a small detachment of custodians who had accompanied the assault force. The battle between the Jarl and the custodians took place in the central throne chamber of Uppsala, a vast hall supported by columns of clear ice that contained the frozen bodies of previous rulers. The custodians, despite their superior training and equipment, found their power weapons partially neutralized by the extreme cold generated by the Jarl's modified physiology. The conflict ended only when the chamber's ceiling collapsed under the stress of battle, burying both the Jarl and several custodians under tons of ice and stone. By the time Imperial forces excavated the site, the Jarl had succumbed to his wounds, and only 2 custodians survived. With Uppsala secured, the remaining Frost keeps quickly negotiated compliance terms. The Emperor, recognizing the value of the Nordic genetic adaptations, incorporated many of their warriors into specialized Imperial army regiments rather than attempting to eliminate their modifications. These Frost Legion units would later prove invaluable during compliance actions on ice worlds encountered during the Great Crusade. The cultural integration of the Nordic populations proceeded along similar pragmatic lines. Rather than suppressing their ancestral beliefs entirely, Imperial iterators recontextualized them, identifying the Emperor with ancient Nordic mythological figures associated with light, warmth, and leadership. The Nordic tendency to venerate enhanced physical forms made them surprisingly receptive to the Imperial truth when presented as the fulfillment rather than the negation of their traditional beliefs. While the Nordic campaign progressed in the north, an entirely different challenge awaited Imperial forces in the equatorial regions of what had once been South America. The territories now known collectively as Sudamerica had undergone catastrophic ecological transformation during the Age of Strife. Ancient gene manipulation technologies, originally designed to enhance agricultural productivity, had run amok in the absence of proper controls. The result was a continent-spanning jungle composed of hyper-aggressive flora that exhibited predatory characteristics normally associated with fauna. The human populations that survived in this green hell had adapted through a combination of technological isolation and their own genetic modifications. The dominant power in the region, the biomagnate hegemony, controlled the few habitable enclaves through monopolization of gene therapy treatments that prevented the native flora from recognizing humans as prey. The biomagnates themselves had undergone extensive modification, incorporating plant DNA into their genome to enhance their control over their territorial boundaries. Imperial reconnaissance of Sudamerica proved exceptionally hazardous. The jungle itself actively hunted intruders, with carnivorous vines that could detect body heat, spore-releasing fungi that induced hallucinogenic states in unwary explorers, and ambulatory plant forms that displayed primitive pack-hunting behaviors. Conventional surveillance methods proved ineffective, as the dense canopy blocked aerial observation, and the aggressive flora quickly enveloped and consumed any fixed monitoring equipment. The Emperor's solution came from an unexpected quarter, the Mechanicum. The tech priests of Mars had maintained an interest in biological systems alongside their more obvious mechanical focus, and several Magos biologists volunteered to develop countermeasures to the Sudamerican flora. Using samples collected by sacrificial servitor units, these tech priests engineered biological agents that could temporarily suppress the predatory responses of the jungle without killing it, an important distinction, as the death of large sections of the ecosystem typically triggered even more aggressive growth from surrounding areas. The first Imperial footholds in Sudamerica were established using these biological countermeasures, creating safe zones from which more conventional military operations could be launched. These enclaves served as bases for specialized Imperial army units trained in jungle warfare and equipped with weapons designed to combat both the hostile environment and the biomagnate forces. The biomagnates responded to this incursion with biological weapons of their own, genetically engineered organisms that combined the worst aspects of the jungle's predatory flora with animal characteristics. These chimera plants could move with purpose across the battlefield, spraying acidic pollen, launching poisoned thorns with ballistic precision, or simply engulfing Imperial troops in digestive tendrils. Conventional weapons proved of limited effectiveness against these biological constructs, as their distributed nervous systems and regenerative capabilities allowed them to function even after sustaining damage that would kill an animal of comparable size. Imperial forces adapted by deploying modified flamer units that dispensed chemical defoliants alongside promethium. These weapons, while effective against the biological constructs, raised concerns about long-term environmental damage that might render conquered territories uninhabitable. The Emperor, ever mindful of preserving resources that could serve the Imperium, ordered the development of more selective countermeasures. The solution came in the form of sonic weapons adapted from mechanicum designs. These devices emitted precisely calibrated frequencies that disrupted the cellular structures of the engineered flora without affecting natural plant life or human tissue. Imperial troops equipped with these harmonic disruptors could neutralize biological threats without the collateral damage caused by chemical or thermal weapons. The biomagnate strongholds presented a different challenge altogether. Unlike the Nordic frost keeps, which were essentially conventional fortresses adapted for extreme cold, the biomagnate enclaves were living structures, massive plant forms that had been genetically engineered to grow into habitable configurations. These living cities could actively respond to threats, sealing breaches with accelerated growth, producing toxic spores when damaged, and even relocating critical structures through controlled expansion and contraction of specialized tissues. The Emperor personally directed the assault on Verd Summus, the primary biomagnate enclave. Rather than attempting to destroy the living city, Imperial forces targeted the specialized nodes that the biomagnates used to control its growth patterns. With these command centers neutralized, the city's defensive responses became uncoordinated and ineffective. Imperial Army engineers then introduced modified growth hormones into the city's nutrient circulation system, inducing it to grow into configurations more suitable for Imperial occupation. The biomagnate leadership, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, attempted to negotiate terms that would preserve their privileged position within the new imperial order. The Emperor, however, had witnessed the extreme genetic stratification they had imposed on the Pseudomerican population and found it incompatible with his vision for unified humanity. While he valued the biomagnates' knowledge of genetic manipulation, he would not permit the continuation of their caste system. The compliance terms offered to the biomagnates were stringent: full disclosure of all genetic technologies, immediate cessation of human modification programs except under imperial supervision, and integration into the standard imperial governance structure. Most biomagnates accepted these terms, recognizing that the alternative was extinction, but a significant minority chose to resist through guerrilla tactics, retreating into the deepest reaches of the jungle. The pacification of these holdouts became a protracted counter-insurgency operation that continued even as the main thrust of the Unification Wars moved elsewhere. Specialized Imperial Army units, augmented with local guides who had suffered under biomagnate rule, conducted systematic sweeps of suspected hideouts. The most effective of these units became known as the Jungle Hunters, developing expertise in tracking and neutralizing both the renegade biomagnates and their engineered guardians. The knowledge gained from the Pseudomerican campaign proved invaluable to the nascent Imperium. The biomagnates' understanding of genetic manipulation, while perverted toward maintaining their own power, contained insights that would later contribute to the development of the gene seed technologies used in creating the legions Astartes. Their techniques for adapting human physiology to extreme environments informed later colonization efforts on death worlds encountered during the Great Crusade. The cultural integration of Pseudomerica followed a different pattern than that used in the Nordic territories. Rather than recontextualizing existing beliefs, imperial iterators emphasized liberation from biomagnate oppression and the benefits of technological advancement under imperial guidance. The population, having suffered generations of exploitation, proved receptive to this message, particularly when accompanied by practical improvements in living conditions and medical care. The alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars had provided the Emperor with unprecedented technological capabilities, but the Indonesic bloc remained a festering wound in his vision of a unified Terra. While initially cooperative during the Pan-Pacific campaign, the bloc's leadership had begun to chafe under the growing imperial influence, their initial pragmatic alliance giving way to resentment and eventually open rebellion. The Indonesic bloc encompassed vast territories across what had once been Southeast Asia, controlling crucial agricultural zones that had somehow remained viable despite Terra's widespread environmental devastation. Their society operated under the iron control of a techno-religious oligarchy led by Cardinal Tang, a figure whose physical appearance had been so drastically altered by cybernetic and genetic modifications that he barely resembled a human being. Tang's upper body housed an array of mechanical appendages that emerged from his torso like metallic tentacles, each tipped with different surgical or weapon attachments. His lower half had been replaced entirely with a hovering platform containing life support systems and power generators. Tang had initially presented himself as a willing partner in the Emperor's unification efforts. The Treaty of Malang, which had facilitated imperial operations against the Pan-Pacific Empire, had granted the Indonesic bloc favorable terms including retention of their leadership structure and religious practices. In private, however, Tang harbored ambitions that extended far beyond mere survival under imperial rule. Intelligence gathered by Malcador's agents indicated that Tang viewed himself as a potential rival to the Emperor, not militarily, as he was pragmatic enough to recognize the Imperium's overwhelming force advantage, but ideologically. The first signs of Tang's treachery emerged in the form of propaganda distributed throughout recently compliant territories. These materials presented the Cardinal as a divine figure whose technological enhancements represented the true path of human evolution, a direct challenge to the imperial truth. More concerning were reports that Tang had begun experimenting with forbidden technologies recovered from ancient vaults beneath the Indonesic capital of Jakarta. These experiments focused on neural interface systems that could potentially allow Tang to extend his consciousness across multiple bodies simultaneously. The Emperor, occupied with consolidating gains in the Nordic territories, initially delegated the Indonesic situation to his generals. A diplomatic mission led by Constantin Valdor was dispatched to Jakarta with instructions to remind Tang of his obligations under the Treaty of Malang and to assess the extent of his potential betrayal. The mission never reached its destination. 15 kilometers from Jakarta, the imperial delegation was attacked by forces bearing Indonesic insignia, but utilizing weapons of unknown origin, radiation projectors, that reduced 3 custodians to ash within seconds. Valdor and the surviving custodians fought their way clear of the ambush and returned to imperial territory with evidence of Tang's betrayal. Analysis of the radiation weapons revealed them to be based on archaeotech patterns dating back to the Dark Age of technology, specifically designed to overcome the enhanced physiology and armor of transhuman warriors. This technology transfer indicated that Tang had not only accessed forbidden knowledge, but had implemented it with alarming speed and effectiveness. The Emperor's response was measured but decisive. Rather than immediately launching a punitive expedition that might trigger a protracted conflict in vital agricultural territories, he ordered a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation to map the full extent of Tang's preparations. Operatives infiltrated key Indonesic installations, revealing that Tang had established a network of hidden research facilities throughout his territories, each working on different aspects of prohibited technology. Most alarming was the discovery that Tang had begun mass-producing biological agents designed to target specific genetic markers, essentially race-specific bioweapons that could potentially eliminate populations not deemed compatible with his vision of human evolution. This discovery transformed the Indonesian situation from a political problem to an existential threat. The emperor mobilized substantial forces for what would become one of the most complex operations of the Unification Wars. The campaign would require not just military victory, but the preservation of the bloc's agricultural infrastructure and the neutralization of biological weapons that could potentially render entire regions uninhabitable. The opening phase of the Indonesian campaign focused on establishing containment boundaries around the bloc's territories. Imperial army units, supported by newly developed mechanicum detection systems, created a quarantine cordon to prevent the potential deployment of biological agents beyond Indonesian borders. This operation required unprecedented coordination between military and scientific personnel, with specialized units trained to detect and neutralize biological and radiological threats. Tang responded by accelerating his timetable. Indonesian forces launched simultaneous attacks against multiple points along the imperial cordon, utilizing their radiation weapons to devastating effect against conventional troops. These attacks appeared designed to create breaches through which contaminated refugees could escape, potentially spreading Tang's engineered pathogens to neighboring territories. Imperial commanders recognized this strategy and implemented containment protocols that included the painful necessity of treating all fleeing civilians as potential biological vectors until they could be properly screened. The emperor, recognizing that conventional military operations would be insufficient against Tang's strategy, authorized the deployment of the first companies of gene-enhanced troops developed after the Thunder Warriors. These warriors, forerunners of what would later become the Legions Astartes, lacked the bulk and raw power of the Thunder Warriors, but possessed greater stability and tactical flexibility. Their enhanced physiology included specific modifications designed to resist both the radiation weapons and biological agents deployed by Indonesian forces. The first major engagement occurred at the Sunda Shelf, a crucial agricultural complex that produced nearly 30% of the bloc's food supply. Imperial forces secured the facility intact through a precision drop operation that placed gene-enhanced troops directly into the command center before defenders could implement scorched earth protocols. The facility's scientific personnel, many of whom had been coerced into service under Tang, provided crucial intelligence about the Cardinal's research programs and the locations of his primary biological weapons facilities. Tang's response to this setback revealed the true extent of his megalomania. Rather than preserving his remaining resources, he ordered the deployment of biological weapons against his own population centers that were at risk of falling to Imperial forces. The first such attack struck the city of Bandung, where aerosol dispersal systems released engineered viral agents into the environmental systems. Within hours, the city's population began exhibiting symptoms of a hemorrhagic fever that liquefied internal organs while leaving the nervous system intact, ensuring maximum suffering before death. Imperial forces had anticipated this possibility and deployed mechanicum, designed atmospheric filtration units that could extract the viral particles from affected areas. These devices, while effective, could not be produced quickly enough to cover all populated areas. The emperor made the difficult decision to prioritize the protection of agricultural zones and research facilities over residential areas, recognizing that the preservation of food production capability would save more lives in the long term than attempting to protect every population center. The battle for the Indonesian bloc took a decisive turn when Imperial intelligence identified Tang's primary command center, not in the capital of Jakar as initially believed, but in a heavily fortified underground complex beneath Mount Merapi. This volcanic facility housed both Tang's personal quarters and the central node of his experimental neural network. Seismic readings indicated that the complex extended nearly 2 kilometers beneath the surface, with multiple redundant power systems and defensive layers. The assault on Mount Merapi represented one of the most challenging operations of the Unification Wars. The approach to the mountain was defended by concentric rings of automated defense systems, radiation projectors, and fanatical troops who had undergone neural conditioning that rendered them immune to pain or fear. Conventional military doctrine would have called for orbital bombardment or tactical nuclear strikes, but such approaches would have triggered the volcanic systems beneath the mountain, potentially causing an eruption that would have devastated the surrounding agricultural regions. Instead, the emperor authorized a multi-layered operation that began with infiltration by specialized units. These operatives, combining the enhanced physiology of the proto-Astartes with advanced stealth technology provided by the Mechanicum, penetrated the outer security perimeters and disabled key sensor arrays. This created blind spots in the defensive network that allowed larger Imperial forces to approach undetected. The main assault force included 5 companies of gene-enhanced troops supported by Mechanicum battle automata specifically designed to withstand the radiation weapons. These forces established breach points at strategic locations around the mountain base, creating multiple avenues of attack that prevented Tang from concentrating his defenses. As Imperial forces penetrated deeper into the complex, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance, including suicide troops wired with viral dispersal systems that activated upon death. The final approach to Tang's inner sanctum required traversing a series of chambers where the Cardinal had conducted his most horrific experiments. Imperial forces discovered thousands of human subjects in various stages of cybernetic modification, many still conscious despite having most of their organic components replaced with machinery. These victims had served as test subjects for Tang's neural network technology, their minds linked together in a crude attempt to create a collective consciousness under his control. Cardinal Tang himself awaited in the central chamber, surrounded by the most elite of his cybernetically enhanced guards. His appearance had changed dramatically since his last public appearance, with additional mechanical components grafted to his body and a pulsating mass of neural tissue visible within a transparent housing atop his hover platform. This neural mass contained tissue samples from thousands of subjects, interconnected through microscopic filaments to create a biological computing system of unprecedented complexity. The battle that followed was brief but intense. Tang's guards utilized internal radiation emitters that made them lethal even in close combat, forcing Imperial troops to rely on ranged weapons and coordinated attacks. Tang himself demonstrated capabilities that went beyond mere technological enhancement, using his neural network to predict Imperial attack patterns and counter them with uncanny precision. It became apparent that he had achieved a limited form of psychic ability through his technological abominations, a perversion of humanity's natural psychic evolution that the Emperor had long foreseen. The tide turned when a small team of custodians, who had accompanied the assault force, managed to breach Tang's personal force field through a synchronized attack that overwhelmed its projection systems. With his defenses compromised, Tang attempted to activate a final failsafe, a system designed to transfer his consciousness into the neural network and trigger the volcanic systems beneath the mountain. This desperate gambit was thwarted when precision fire from Custodian Guardian spears severed the connections between Tang's biological components and his mechanical systems, trapping his consciousness in his failing organic remains. The capture of Cardinal Tang alive represented a significant intelligence coup for Imperial forces. Extensive interrogation revealed the full scope of his activities, including connections to other techno-barbarian states that had provided him with components and knowledge in exchange for promises of protection from Imperial compliance actions. Most disturbing was the discovery that Tang had established sleeper cells throughout already compliant territories, equipped with biological agents designed to activate months or even years after Imperial forces had moved on. The Emperor personally reviewed the intelligence gathered from Tang's interrogation and storage systems, using it to implement the first comprehensive Imperial compliance protocols. These procedures went beyond simple military occupation to include systematic screening of population centers, monitoring of communication networks, and establishment of early warning systems for biological or technological threats. While initially resource-intensive, these protocols would later be refined and implemented throughout the expanding Imperium. The judgment passed upon the Indonesian leadership set a precedent that would echo throughout the Great Crusade and beyond. Cardinal Tang himself was not simply executed, but subjected to a carefully designed punishment that reflected the magnitude of his crimes. His consciousness was separated from his biological remains and contained within a specialized device that prevented its dissipation while denying it any sensory input or means of communication, an eternal isolation that the emperor deemed appropriate for one who had sought to pervert the collective human consciousness for his own aggrandizement. The lower tiers of Indonesian leadership faced varied fates depending on their level of complicity. Those who had actively participated in the development of prohibited technologies or deployment of weapons against civilian populations were executed, their names and deeds recorded in the growing imperial archives as examples of human perfidy. Those who had served under duress were given opportunities for redemption through service to the Imperium, often in capacities that utilized their technical knowledge while keeping them under close supervision. The broader Indonesian population, many of whom had suffered under Tang's increasingly oppressive rule, generally welcomed imperial forces as liberators rather than conquerors. The emperor's iterators emphasized that the population had been victims rather than accomplices, focusing public sentiment against the leadership rather than fostering resentment of imperial authority. This approach, combined with immediate improvements in living conditions and medical care for those affected by Tang's biological weapons, helped secure genuine compliance rather than mere submission. The agricultural resources of the Indonesian territories proved crucial for supporting the emperor's expanding forces. With proper management and the application of recovered agricultural technologies, productivity increased by nearly 40% within a year of imperial takeover. These resources allowed for improved rations for imperial army units and provided the specialized nutrients required for the accelerating Astartes creation program. The technological discoveries made in Tang's research facilities presented a more complex challenge. While much of his work represented dangerous perversions of human knowledge, certain aspects, particularly in the fields of neural interface systems and biological computing, contained innovations that could potentially serve the Imperium if properly controlled. The emperor established specialized research divisions under the direct supervision of the Mechanicum to evaluate these technologies and determine which could be safely adapted for imperial use. The subjugation of the Indonesian bloc had secured crucial agricultural resources for the emperor's growing imperium, but Terra's unification remained incomplete. Among the remaining powers that defied imperial authority, the ethnarchy stood as perhaps the most ideologically significant opponent. Unlike the techno-barbarian states whose resistance stemmed primarily from a desire to maintain political power, the ethnarchy represented something far more challenging to the emperor's vision: organized religion with genuine popular support. The ethnarchy controlled territories spanning what had once been the Middle East and portions of the Caucasus region, centered around a heavily fortified city-state built upon the ruins of ancient Jerusalem. This domain had weathered the Age of Strife through a rigid theocratic structure that combined elements of ancient Abrahamic faiths with technological veneration. The ethnarch himself, a figure known as Narthan Doom, claimed direct divine authority as the voice of the God Emperor of mankind, an ironic title given his fierce opposition to the actual emperor's secular agenda. Imperial intelligence gathered by Malkador's agents revealed that the ethnarchy maintained its control through a combination of religious fervor and technological superiority. Their priest engineers had preserved functioning STC fragments that allowed them to produce energy weapons more advanced than those available to most other techno-barbarian states. These divine lightbringers, as they were called in ethnarchy propaganda, could disable vehicle systems or incinerate infantry with concentrated energy beams that Mechanicum analysis later identified as specialized laser technology. More concerning than their military capabilities was the ethnarchy's sophisticated propaganda apparatus. Unlike many techno-barbarian states that relied primarily on brute force to maintain control, the ethnarchy had developed highly effective methods of ideological conditioning. Their priest orators could sway entire populations through carefully crafted sermons that combined religious imagery with practical instructions for resistance against the false emperor who denies the divine spark in mankind. The emperor recognized that conventional military tactics alone would be insufficient against such an opponent. The ethnarchy's strength lay not in its armies, but in its ideas that directly contradicted the secular rationalism of the imperial truth. This conflict would need to be won in the hearts and minds of the population as much as on the battlefield. To this end, the emperor deployed his iterators alongside military forces, tasking them with countering ethnarchy propaganda and presenting the benefits of imperial unification in terms the population could embrace. The campaign began with a strategic encirclement rather than direct assault. Imperial forces established control over territories surrounding the ethnarchy's core domains, cutting off supply routes and isolating pockets of resistance. This approach allowed for the systematic processing of captured territories, with iterators working to re-educate the population while screening for ethnarchy agents who might attempt to maintain underground resistance networks. The ethnarchy responded with asymmetric tactics, deploying teams of divine martyrs, fanatical operatives who had undergone extensive conditioning to resist pain and fear. These individuals infiltrated imperial-held territories to conduct sabotage operations and public acts of defiance designed to inspire continued resistance. Their most effective tactic involved public self-immolation during imperial truth sessions, creating powerful symbolic imagery that undermined iterator efforts. As the noose tightened around the ethnarchy's core territories, Narthan Doom escalated his rhetoric, declaring a holy war against the soulless legions of the Machine Emperor. This proclamation triggered coordinated uprisings in recently compliant territories, revealing sleeper cells that had remained dormant during the initial imperial occupation. These uprisings, while ultimately unsuccessful, diverted imperial resources and demonstrated the resilience of religious belief in the face of rational argumentation. The emperor, analyzing the situation with his characteristic strategic insight, identified the central weakness in the ethnarchy's position: Doom himself. Unlike many religious leaders throughout human history who genuinely believed in their proclaimed faiths, imperial intelligence suggested that Doom was a cynical manipulator who used religion primarily as a control mechanism. His private communications, intercepted by imperial operatives, revealed contempt for the superstitious masses he claimed to serve as spiritual leader. This discovery provided the key to the emperor's strategy. Rather than attempting to dismantle the ethnarchy's religious infrastructure directly, which might have created martyrs and strengthened resistance, he would expose the hypocrisy at its core. The emperor authorized a specialized operation targeting the ethnarchy's communication systems, which would broadcast Doom's private statements to the population he supposedly served. The technical aspects of this operation were entrusted to Mechanicum specialists who had studied the ethnarchy's Vox network architecture. These tech priests developed override protocols that could temporarily seize control of the broadcast systems used for daily prayers and announcements. The content, carefully selected excerpts from Doom's private communications, was prepared by iterators who understood which statements would most effectively undermine his religious authority. The broadcast operation, executed during the ethnarchy's primary prayer time when most citizens would be connected to the Vox network, created immediate unrest in major population centers. Recordings of Doom dismissing sacred texts as useful fictions and describing religious rituals as necessary theater for controlling the weak-minded shattered the faith of many previously loyal subjects. Within hours, spontaneous protests erupted outside government buildings and temples, with citizens demanding explanations from lower-ranking clergy who were themselves reeling from the revelations. Doom attempted to contain the damage by claiming the broadcasts were imperial fabrications, but the specific details contained in the recordings, references to private conversations and internal ethnarchy matters, lent them undeniable authenticity. As civil unrest spread, Doom retreated to his heavily fortified personal compound in Jerusalem, surrounded by his most fanatical followers who either maintained their faith despite the evidence or were too compromised by their own actions to defect. With the ethnarchy's popular support crumbling, the emperor authorized the final military phase of the campaign. Imperial army units, supported by early prototype Astartes warriors, advanced into the ethnarchy's core territories, meeting minimal resistance. Many ethnarchy military commanders, seeing the collapse of the regime's legitimacy, chose to surrender rather than fight for a cause they now recognized as corrupted. Others attempted to establish independent fiefdoms, only to find themselves outmatched by the coordinated imperial forces. The final obstacle to complete compliance was the Jerusalem compound, a massive fortified complex built around the ancient religious sites of the city. This compound housed not only Doom's personal quarters, but also the ethnarchy's central administrative apparatus, and most importantly, their primary SDC fragments. Intelligence indicated that Doom had wired the entire complex with explosives, threatening to destroy these invaluable technological assets rather than allow them to fall into Imperial hands. The Emperor, recognizing both the practical and symbolic importance of Jerusalem, decided to personally lead the final compliance action. His presence would serve multiple purposes. His superior tactical abilities would maximize the chances of securing the SDC fragments intact. His psychic powers could help identify and neutralize hidden threats, and his personal authority could potentially convince remaining ethnarchy forces to surrender without further bloodshed. The Emperor's arrival at the Jerusalem Operational Theater marked a rare personal intervention in the later stages of the Unification Wars. He came not with the overwhelming force that had characterized earlier campaigns, but with a small, specialized detachment, including several custodians and a cadre of the most psychologically astute iterators. This approach reflected his assessment that the remaining resistance was primarily ideological rather than military. As Imperial forces established positions around the Jerusalem compound, the Emperor issued a direct communication to Doom, offering him an opportunity to surrender with the guarantee of fair treatment. The offer was publicly broadcast, ensuring that both Doom's followers and the civilian population were aware of the terms. This transparent approach further undermined Doom's authority, as his refusal to accept reasonable terms cast him as the aggressor, prolonging a now pointless conflict. Doom's response came in the form of a counter-broadcast, challenging the Emperor to face him personally in the Cathedral of the Divine Light, the central religious structure within the compound. This challenge was clearly designed as a trap, but it also presented an opportunity to resolve the conflict with minimal further destruction. After consulting with his advisors, the Emperor accepted the challenge with specific conditions regarding safe passage and verification that the SDC fragments would remain secure. The meeting between the Emperor and Narthan Doom took place in the massive cathedral that had been constructed from the remnants of ancient religious structures. The building itself represented a physical manifestation of the ethnarchy's syncretic faith, incorporating elements from various human religions into a grand edifice dominated by a massive stained glass window depicting humanity's ascension through technological enlightenment. The irony of this imagery, so close to the Emperor's own vision yet twisted to serve religious control, was not lost on those present. Among the witnesses to this historic confrontation was Uriah Alatyra, the last priest of the Church of the Lightning Stone. Unlike Doom, whose faith appeared largely performative, Alatyra was known as a genuine believer whose theological knowledge and sincere conviction had earned him respect even among imperial iterators. His presence had been requested by Doom, presumably to provide religious legitimacy to the proceedings, though Imperial intelligence suggested a more complex relationship between the two religious leaders. The dialogue between the Emperor and Uriah Alatyra that followed Doom's predictable betrayal and elimination has become one of the most studied exchanges in Imperial history. While Doom had planned an ambush using hidden weapons systems within the cathedral, these were neutralized by the Emperor's psychic abilities before they could activate. With Doom's guards subdued by the accompanying custodians, the cathedral became the setting for a philosophical debate rather than a battlefield. Alatyra, unlike Doom, engaged with the Emperor's arguments in good faith, presenting a sophisticated defense of religious belief that went beyond simple superstition. He argued that faith provided meaning and moral framework in a universe that otherwise offered only cold materialism. The Emperor, rather than dismissing these arguments, addressed them directly, explaining his view that humanity needed to embrace rational self-determination rather than supernatural consolation if it was to survive the challenges ahead. The debate touched on fundamental questions that would define the Imperium's approach to human culture and belief. Alatyra questioned whether the imperial truth, with its rejection of the supernatural, could provide the same psychological comfort and social cohesion that religion had offered throughout human history. The Emperor countered that religion had also been the source of countless conflicts and had often impeded scientific progress that could have benefited humanity. As the discussion progressed, the Emperor revealed aspects of his long-term vision that had rarely been articulated so clearly. He spoke of humanity's psychic potential and the dangers it presented, explaining that superstitious frameworks for understanding these emerging abilities would lead to catastrophe. Only by approaching psychic phenomena through the lens of scientific understanding could humanity navigate this evolutionary transition safely. Religious interpretations of psychic manifestations as miracles or divine intervention would prevent the development of necessary control mechanisms. Alatyra's most challenging question concerned the nature of the Emperor himself. If supernatural entities were mere fiction, how could the Emperor's own seemingly godlike powers be explained? The Emperor's response emphasized that his abilities, while far beyond normal human capacity, were the result of natural development rather than supernatural origin. He presented himself not as fundamentally different from humanity, but as a potential preview of what humanity might eventually become through directed evolution. The philosophical exchange concluded with neither participant fully convincing the other, but with a mutual respect that contrasted sharply with the fanaticism that had characterized the ethnarchy's approach. Alatyra, while maintaining his personal faith, acknowledged the practical necessity of unification under rational governance. The Emperor, while firm in his secularism, recognized the genuine human need for meaning that religion had historically addressed. As the debate concluded, the Emperor offered Alatyra a position within the emerging imperial administration, suggesting that his insights into human psychological needs could inform the development of cultural institutions that would provide meaning without supernaturalism. Alatyra requested time to consider this offer, asking permission to remain in the cathedral for a final night of prayer and reflection. The Emperor granted this request, ordering his forces to secure the rest of the compound while leaving the cathedral undisturbed. This decision, while respecting Alatyra's dignity, would have significant consequences. During the night, as imperial forces cataloged the technological treasures of the ethnarchy and began the process of integrating the population into imperial compliance, the Cathedral of the Divine Light erupted in flames. The Cathedral of the Divine Light's destruction marked a somber conclusion to the ethnarchy campaign. Forensic examination of the ruins revealed that Uriah Alatyra had activated an ancient Prometheum distribution system built into the cathedral's foundations, choosing self-immolation rather than abandonment of his beliefs. The Emperor ordered the site preserved as both memorial and reminder of the challenges inherent in transforming human consciousness. This decision reflected a growing pragmatism in the Emperor's approach to cultural integration, recognition that eradicating deeply held beliefs required more than rational arguments or military force. With the ethnarchy's fall, the last major organized resistance to imperial rule had been eliminated. The remaining Pan-Pacific strongholds, isolated island fortresses that had maintained nominal independence through obscurity rather than strength, surrendered when confronted by imperial naval forces. The commanders of these installations, pragmatic military leaders rather than ideologues, recognized the futility of resistance and negotiated terms that preserved their technical expertise by integrating them into the expanding imperial navy. The most remote of these holdouts, the fortress island of Nihon Alpha, presented unique challenges due to its extensive automated defense systems. Originally designed to operate with minimal human oversight, these systems had evolved during the Age of Strife into semi-autonomous networks that responded to perceived threats with escalating force. Imperial compliance teams discovered that direct military approaches triggered maximum defensive responses, while smaller, unarmed delegations were permitted limited access. This peculiarity allowed specialized mechanicum teams to gradually introduce compliance protocols directly into the defense network's logic engines, effectively subverting the systems from within. The human population, isolated within protected enclaves and largely unaware of external developments, transitioned to imperial compliance with minimal disruption. The final military action of the Unification Wars targeted the Caucasus Waste Reclamation Zone, where scattered bands of augmented raiders had exploited the power vacuum created by the Ethnarchy's collapse. These raiders, utilizing scavenged technology and crude biological enhancements, posed little strategic threat but disrupted vital resource extraction operations. Rather than deploying elite forces against such minor opponents, the Emperor authorized the first field deployment of standardized Imperial Army protocols. Regular human soldiers, equipped with newly standardized weapons and operating under unified command structures, systematically cleared the region. This operation served as both practical pacification and proof of concept for the military doctrines that would support the coming Great Crusade. With military unification complete, the Emperor turned his attention to establishing governance structures that could effectively administer Terra while supporting his broader ambitions. The challenges were immense, integrating disparate populations with conflicting cultural traditions, rebuilding infrastructure devastated by millennia of warfare, and establishing economic systems that could support massive military expansion. These tasks required administrative frameworks beyond anything that had existed during the Age of Strife. The foundation of imperial governance emerged with the establishment of the Council of Terra in the 30th millennium. Unlike the ad hoc command structures that had directed the Unification Wars, the Council represented a deliberate attempt to create sustainable civilian administration. Its initial membership drew from diverse sources: former techno-barbarian administrators who had demonstrated both competence and adaptability, mechanicum representatives ensuring technological integration, and trusted imperial commanders transitioning to non-military roles. Most significant was the appointment of Malcador the Sigillite as the Emperor's administrative proxy, empowered to make decisions in his name when he focused on specialized projects. The Council's structure reflected practical necessities rather than abstract political theories. Administrative divisions corresponded to functional requirements: resource management, population compliance, infrastructure development, and military support. This pragmatic approach prioritized effectiveness over ideological consistency, allowing for regional variations in governance where local conditions demanded flexibility. The Nordic territories, for example, maintained traditional clan structures as intermediaries between the population and imperial administrators, while former Pan-Pacific regions operated under more direct hierarchical control. Beneath the Council's central authority, a complex bureaucracy began to form. The early imperial administration bore little resemblance to the labyrinthine institution it would eventually become, but the seeds of future complexity were evident in its initial design. The need to process vast amounts of information from across Terra's surface led to the establishment of specialized departments with overlapping responsibilities, a feature initially considered a temporary inefficiency that would, over millennia, become an entrenched characteristic of imperial governance. The Departamento Munitorum, tasked with coordinating resource allocation for military purposes, exemplified this early administrative evolution. Originally a simple logistics operation supporting the final unification campaigns, it gradually expanded its purview to encompass manufacturing standards, recruitment protocols, and eventually, interplanetary supply chains. This organic growth, driven by immediate needs rather than centralized planning, established patterns that would define imperial institutions for millennia to come. communications infrastructure proved particularly challenging to standardize. The disparate techno-barbarian states had utilized incompatible systems ranging from primitive radio networks to sophisticated quantum entanglement communicators. Imperial engineers, working with Mechanicum support, established conversion protocols that allowed these systems to interface while gradually implementing standardized Vox technology in critical regions. Full communication standardization would not be achieved until well into the Great Crusade, but the foundational work began during this transitional period. Economic integration proceeded alongside administrative consolidation. The emperor authorized the establishment of the first standardized currency system since the Age of Strife, with value backed by energy production from the former terawatt facilities. This energy scrip provided a stable medium of exchange that facilitated resource redistribution across formerly hostile territories. Regional currencies remained in circulation during a transitional period, their value pegged to the imperial standard through carefully calculated exchange rates that gradually adjusted to encourage adoption of the unified system. Perhaps the most significant administrative innovation was the establishment of the Adeptus Terra as a formalized civil service. Unlike previous human bureaucracies that had typically evolved through gradual accretion, the Adeptus Terra was deliberately designed as a meritocratic institution with standardized training, clear advancement pathways, and internal consistency mechanisms. While primitive by later standards, this early incarnation established fundamental principles that would guide imperial administration even after 10,000 years of evolution and distortion. The Adeptus Terra's initial recruitment drew heavily from the scholarly castes of former techno-barbarian states, particularly those with administrative experience. These individuals underwent intensive re-education programs designed to instill imperial values and standardized methodologies. The most promising candidates received specialized training under Malcador's direct supervision, forming the nucleus of what would eventually become the administrative elite. This emphasis on merit-based selection, while never perfectly implemented, represented a significant departure from the hereditary or strength-based leadership common during the Age of Strife. Infrastructure reconstruction presented challenges that even the Emperor's foresight had not fully anticipated. Terra's environment had suffered catastrophic damage during the Age of Strife, with atmospheric pollution, radioactive contamination, and biological hazards rendering large regions effectively uninhabitable. The technologies needed for environmental remediation had been largely lost, requiring extensive research and development before implementation could begin. This necessity drove unprecedented cooperation between imperial administrators and Mechanicum specialists, establishing collaborative patterns that would facilitate the later integration of Mars into the broader Imperium. The most ambitious environmental project focused on atmospheric processing. Terra's air had become a toxic miasma of industrial pollutants, radioactive particles, and chemical warfare residue, requiring massive filtration systems to render it breathable without assistance. The Emperor authorized the construction of enormous atmospheric processing complexes based on designs recovered from Pan-Pacific archives, modified and enhanced by Mechanicum engineers. These facilities, each covering several square kilometers, began the slow process of extracting contaminants while rebalancing atmospheric composition. Even with these advanced systems operating at maximum capacity, projections indicated that comprehensive atmospheric restoration would require centuries of continuous operation. Water purification presented equally daunting challenges. Terra's oceans had been transformed into chemical soups hostile to most forms of life, while groundwater reserves suffered from radioactive contamination and heavy metal infiltration. Imperial hydro engineers implemented multi-stage purification systems that gradually processed contaminated water through biological, chemical, and energetic filtration stages. The purified water, initially reserved for agricultural and industrial use, eventually became available for general consumption in limited quantities. As with atmospheric restoration, complete hydrospheric recovery exceeded the timeframe of the Unification period, but the foundational systems were established during this critical phase. Soil remediation proved particularly crucial for establishing sustainable food production. Centuries of warfare had left much of Terra's arable land contaminated with heavy metals, synthetic toxins, and radioactive isotopes. Imperial agricultural specialists, working with biological samples preserved in gene banks, developed specialized organisms that could extract contaminants while preparing soil for subsequent cultivation. These bioremediation techniques, combined with carefully designed crop rotation systems, gradually restored agricultural productivity in selected regions. The Indonesian territories, having suffered less extreme contamination than other areas, became the primary food production centers during this transitional period. Urban reconstruction followed distinctive patterns that reflected the emperor's long-term vision. Rather than simply rebuilding the haphazard conglomerations that had characterized techno-barbarian settlements, imperial architects implemented standardized designs optimized for resource efficiency, population control, and defensive considerations. These early hab blocks established templates that would later evolve into the massive hive cities of the developed imperium. While utilitarian in appearance, they incorporated sophisticated life support systems, waste recycling facilities, and energy distribution networks that represented significant improvements over Age of Strife conditions. Transportation infrastructure received particular attention, with the emperor recognizing its critical importance for both administrative control and resource distribution. The fractured transportation networks of the techno-barbarian era, local systems designed for internal use with deliberate incompatibilities at boundaries, were gradually replaced with standardized maglev systems for civilian transport and reinforced roadways for military use. These physical connections, supplemented by regulated air transport corridors, bound formerly isolated regions into a cohesive whole. The cultural integration of Terra's disparate populations presented challenges that could not be resolved through administrative edicts or technological solutions. The techno-barbarian states had developed wildly divergent cultural traditions during the Age of Strife, many incompatible with both each other and the rational secularism of the imperial truth. Rather than attempting immediate cultural homogenization, imperial iterators employed a graduated approach that preserved harmless cultural expressions while systematically eliminating elements that contradicted fundamental imperial principles. This cultural transformation operated through educational systems established across compliant territories. The first imperial schola focused on practical knowledge, technical skills, administrative procedures, and basic scientific principles, while subtly incorporating elements of the imperial truth into their curricula. Children raised in these educational environments absorbed imperial values alongside practical knowledge, creating a generation that identified primarily with the unified imperium rather than their regional origins. This approach avoided the resistance that more direct cultural suppression might have triggered while achieving similar long-term outcomes. Adult populations experienced cultural integration through more varied mechanisms. Public information systems broadcast standardized content that emphasized shared human identity over regional differences. Work assignments frequently relocated individuals to different regions, disrupting established cultural enclaves and forcing adaptation to imperial norms. Religious practices, while not officially prohibited except where they directly contradicted imperial authority, found themselves without institutional support or public venues, gradually relegated to private observance among older generations. The most effective cultural integration tool proved to be the tangible improvements in living conditions that accompanied imperial rule. Populations that had endured centuries of deprivation under techno-barbarian regimes experienced unprecedented stability, reliable food supplies, and basic medical care under imperial administration. These practical benefits generated genuine support that facilitated acceptance of accompanying cultural changes. Imperial iterators skillfully connected these improvements to the rational, secular principles of the imperial truth, presenting material progress as the natural outcome of abandoning superstition and embracing human potential. As Terra's unification neared completion, the Emperor increasingly delegated administrative responsibilities to the Council and Malcador, focusing his personal attention on specialized projects crucial to his broader vision. The most significant of these was conducted in secret facilities deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, the Primarch project that would create the transhuman leaders of his legions Astartes. This work, drawing on genetic knowledge accumulated over millennia and enhanced by technologies recovered during the Unification Wars, represented the culmination of the Emperor's plans for humanity's advancement. Simultaneously, construction began on what would become the Imperial Palace, not merely a residence or administrative center, but a physical manifestation of the Emperor's vision for unified humanity. Built upon the foundations of his earlier Himalayan fortress, the palace expanded to encompass massive defensive works, administrative complexes, and technological marvels that would establish Terra as the unquestioned center of human civilization. This construction, utilizing resources and expertise from across the unified planet, symbolized the transformation from fractured techno-barbarism to cohesive imperium. Deep within the Himalayan mountains, far beneath the emerging spires of what would become the Imperial Palace, the Emperor had established his most secure and secretive facility. Unlike the grand, visible structures rising on the surface that symbolized humanity's reunification, these underground chambers were known to only his most trusted confidants. It was here, in gene laboratories shielded by layers of both physical barriers and psychic wards, that the Emperor embarked on what would become known as the Primarch Project, the creation of 20 superhuman beings designed to serve as both generals for his armies and sons, crafted from his own genetic material. The laboratories themselves represented the pinnacle of recovered genetic technology, augmented by the Emperor's own unparalleled knowledge accumulated over millennia of human history. The central chamber housed massive cogitator arrays connected to gene sequencers of incomprehensible complexity. These machines hummed with constant activity, processing genetic data at speeds that would have seemed miraculous even during the dark age of technology. The walls were lined with stasis tubes containing biological samples collected throughout human history, preserved examples of both baseline humans and various genetic deviants that exhibited traits the Emperor wished to incorporate or specifically avoid. Adjacent chambers contained more specialized equipment, neural programmers designed to imprint complex knowledge directly into developing minds, gravitic anomaly generators that could manipulate the fundamental forces affecting cellular development, and psycho-reactive matrices that could interface with the immaterium in carefully controlled ways. The Emperor had designed each system personally, often building components with his own hands when existing technology proved insufficient for his needs. The scientific principles underlying the Primarch project extended far beyond conventional genetics. The Emperor's work incorporated elements of archaeotech recovered from the most ancient human settlements, xenobiological concepts derived from careful study of non-human species, and psychic techniques that operated at the intersection of materium and immaterium. This holistic approach reflected the Emperor's understanding that truly transcendent beings could not be created through genetic manipulation alone. They would require fundamental alterations at every level of their existence. The foundation of the Primarch genome began with the Emperor's own genetic material, not simply as a template to be modified, but as a core around which additional traits would be constructed. Unlike the Thunder Warriors or even the early Astartes prototypes, the Primarchs would not be enhanced humans, but fundamentally new beings, sharing humanity's ancestral heritage, but engineered for capabilities far beyond even the most optimistic predictions of natural human evolution. This genetic foundation was supplemented with specific traits drawn from various human bloodlines that had demonstrated exceptional abilities throughout history. From the warriors of ancient Terran civilizations came genetic markers for physical strength and combat instinct. From isolated populations that had developed unique adaptations during the Age of Strife came resilience to environmental extremes. From rare psychic individuals came markers for enhanced neural development and immaterium sensitivity, carefully calibrated to provide capabilities without vulnerability to warp influence. The physical development chambers for the Primarchs represented marvels of bioengineering. Each Primarch required a specialized gestation capsule, a massive cylindrical structure composed of ceramite, adamantium, and transparent armor-glass sections that allowed for observation. These capsules were not merely containers, but active participants in the creation process, equipped with thousands of microscopic manipulator arms that could adjust cellular development in real time, nutrient delivery systems calibrated to each Primarch's unique requirements, and stasis field generators that could selectively accelerate or decelerate temporal flow around specific developing tissues. The interior of each capsule contained a specialized amniotic fluid that bore little resemblance to its natural counterpart. This golden-hued liquid served as both physical support medium and information transfer system, its complex molecular structure encoded with developmental instructions too numerous and intricate to be contained within genetic material alone. Microscopic machines suspended in this fluid monitored development constantly, reporting deviations from expected parameters and implementing corrective measures when necessary. Each Primarch's development was individually designed, with the Emperor incorporating specific traits intended to fulfill particular roles within his grand strategy. Some Primarchs received enhanced analytical capabilities for strategic planning, others accelerated muscle development for close combat supremacy, still others specialized neural structures for leadership and inspiration. These variations were not random, but carefully calculated elements of the Emperor's vision, 20 unique aspects of war and governance embodied in superhuman form. Beyond physical and mental capabilities, the Emperor incorporated what might be termed spiritual elements into each Primarch's creation. Through techniques known only to himself, he infused each developing Primarch with a fragment of his own psychic essence, not merely energy, but aspects of his own consciousness, carefully partitioned and modified to serve specific purposes. This process created beings who were, in a very real sense, extensions of the Emperor himself, while maintaining their own distinct identities and autonomy. The technical challenges of the Primarch project extended beyond the creation of the Primarchs themselves to the support systems they would require. Standard equipment designed for human use would be inadequate for beings of their size and strength. Conventional weapons would seem like toys in their hands, standard armor would restrict rather than protect, and ordinary nutrient intake would be insufficient to fuel their enhanced metabolisms. Anticipating these needs, the Emperor established parallel research programs to develop appropriate equipment, weaponry, and support systems scaled to Primarch physiology. The most significant of these parallel developments was the design of specialized power armor that would later evolve into the Custodian and Astartes variants. The Primarch prototypes represented entirely new concepts in personal protection, adaptive systems that could interface directly with their wearers' nervous systems, power generation capabilities that could sustain operation indefinitely in most environments, and material compositions that balanced protection with mobility in ways previously thought impossible. As the Primarchs developed within their gestation capsules, the Emperor spent countless hours in personal observation, often standing motionless before the tanks for days at a time, his mind interfacing directly with the monitoring systems to assess progress at levels no instrument could detect. During these sessions, he would sometimes make minute adjustments to developmental parameters, alterations so precise that even the Mechanicum adepts assisting with the project could not discern their purpose until the results manifested months later. These periods of direct involvement became less frequent as Terra's unification progressed, with the Emperor increasingly required to address administrative matters and strategic planning for the coming Great Crusade. In his absence, the project continued under the supervision of trusted geneticists and biomechanical adepts, following the exacting protocols he had established. Chief among these supervisors was Amr Astartes, a geneticist of unparalleled skill whose contributions to the project were second only to the Emperor's own. Astartes had been recruited during the later stages of the Unification Wars, her talents discovered in a gene laboratory within the Pan-Pacific territories. Unlike many Imperial scientists who approached their work with cold detachment, Astartes developed a personal connection to the developing Primarchs, referring to them as "my children" in private communications. This emotional investment, while potentially concerning from a security perspective, resulted in extraordinarily meticulous attention to their developmental needs. The Primarch project progressed through several distinct phases, each building upon the achievements of the previous while incorporating new insights. The initial phase focused on basic viability, creating genetic structures stable enough to support the enhanced capabilities the Emperor envisioned. The second phase addressed cognitive development, ensuring that the Primarch's mental capabilities would match their physical potential. The third phase, perhaps the most delicate, involved the integration of psychic capabilities without creating vulnerability to warp influence. Throughout these phases, the Emperor maintained absolute secrecy regarding the project's full scope. Even trusted advisors like Malkador were provided only partial information, with different aspects of the work compartmentalized to prevent any individual besides the Emperor from understanding the complete picture. This secrecy extended to physical security as well, with the gene laboratories protected by concentric rings of defenses including custodian guards, automated weapon systems, and psychic wards that could detect unauthorized intrusion attempts at the level of intent rather than physical presence. Despite these precautions, as the Primarchs neared completion, subtle signs of external interest began to manifest. Instruments monitoring the Immaterium detected increasing disturbances focused around the laboratory complex. Psychers serving the Emperor reported unsettling dreams featuring 20 lights being observed by hungry entities from beyond normal space. The Emperor himself sensed a growing attention from the warp, not random turbulence, but directed consciousness, calculating and patient. The Emperor responded by strengthening the psychic wards around the facility and accelerating certain aspects of the project while deliberately slowing others, adjustments designed to obscure the true development timeline from whatever was watching. He increased his personal presence in the laboratories, his own immense psychic power serving as both shield and distraction. These countermeasures appeared effective, with warp disturbances temporarily subsiding and monitoring systems reporting normalized conditions. This apparent security proved tragically deceptive. As the Primarchs reached their final developmental stage, with physical bodies fully formed and cognitive functions activating, the carefully maintained barriers between Materium and Immaterium experienced a catastrophic breach. Unlike conventional warp incursions that manifest as violent tears in reality, this breach occurred with surgical precision, a targeted weakening of specific protective measures around the Primarch gestation chambers. The entities responsible for this breach would later be identified as the Ruinous Powers, warp-based intelligences that had observed humanity's development with growing interest and now acted to disrupt the Emperor's plans. Their intervention manifested not as direct attack, but as a reality-distorting vortex that engulfed the Primarch chambers, creating localized warp portals around each gestation capsule. Imperial records of the exact sequence of events remain fragmentary, with much information deliberately obscured or destroyed in subsequent years. What is known with certainty is that all 20 Primarch gestation capsules were drawn into the warp through these precisely calibrated portals. The physical laboratory remained largely intact, with monitoring systems continuing to function and recording the inexplicable disappearance of their subjects. Support staff in adjacent chambers reported sensing a momentary pressure change and hearing what some described as distant laughter before normal conditions returned. The Emperor's reaction to this catastrophe revealed aspects of his nature rarely glimpsed by even his closest advisors. Upon discovering the Primarch's disappearance, he displayed not the cold calculation that characterized most of his decisions, but a profound and terrible rage. Witnesses reported the laboratory complex experiencing gravitational anomalies, with equipment levitating and energy discharges manifesting spontaneously around the Emperor's form. For several hours, he remained in the central chamber, his mind apparently engaged in some form of psychic search or battle, invisible to normal perception. When the Emperor finally emerged from the laboratory, his demeanor had returned to its typical composed state, but those sensitive to psychic emanations reported an underlying current of determination that bordered on the obsessive. Without explanation to anyone save perhaps Malcador, he immediately initiated two parallel responses to the disaster. The first response was practical, the acceleration of the Astartes program that had been developed as a complement to the Primarch project. Using preserved genetic samples from each Primarch, the Emperor created 20 distinct gene seed templates that could be implanted in human candidates to create transhuman warriors who, while far less powerful than the Primarchs themselves, would carry some portion of their genetic legacy. These would become the foundation of the 20 Space Marine Legions, each bearing genetic markers of their missing Primarch. The second response remained largely hidden from Imperial records, but was suggested by subsequent events. The Emperor appeared to maintain some form of psychic connection to the scattered Primarchs, occasionally displaying knowledge of their circumstances that could not have been obtained through conventional means. This connection suggested that while the physical Primarchs had been lost, the psychic imprint the Emperor had placed within each remained active, providing a tenuous link that might eventually allow for their recovery. The laboratory complex that had housed the Primarch project was not abandoned following the catastrophe, but repurposed for the expanded Astartes program. The specialized equipment designed for Primarch development was modified to support mass production of gene seed, with new facilities constructed in adjacent caverns to accommodate the thousands of aspirants who would form the first generation of Space Marines. What had been intended as a nurturing place for 20 superhuman sons became instead a factory for creating armies of lesser, but still formidable warriors. The Emperor's private quarters adjacent to the laboratory remained untouched, preserved exactly as they had been on the day of the Primarch's disappearance. Within this chamber, accessible only to the Emperor himself, 20 small symbolic tokens remained arranged in a precise pattern, personal items he had intended to present to each Primarch upon their awakening. These tokens, their significance known only to their creator, served as both memorial and promise, a father's acknowledgement of loss and determination to eventually recover what had been taken. As Terra's unification reached its final stages and preparations for the Great Crusade accelerated, the Emperor maintained this private vigil alongside his public duties. The expanding imperial bureaucracy, the construction of the first expeditionary fleets, and the establishment of administrative systems that could function during his absence all proceeded according to plan. But beneath these visible activities ran a constant undercurrent of search, resources allocated to investigating unusual phenomena on distant worlds, psychers tasked with monitoring specific patterns in the immaterium, and Mechanicum adepts analyzing astronomical data for signs that might lead to the scattered Primarchs. The Primarch project, intended as the crowning achievement of the Emperor's work on Terra, had instead become the driving motivation for the Great Crusade itself. What had been conceived as a reconquest of the stars for humanity's benefit now carried an additional purpose, a father's search for his lost sons across the vast expanse of the galaxy. This personal dimension, rarely acknowledged in official pronouncements but evident in the Emperor's actions, would shape the character of the expanding Imperium in ways none could have predicted. With Terra unified under his rule and the Primarch project suffering its catastrophic setback, the Emperor faced a critical strategic decision. The Thunder Warriors, while devastatingly effective during the Unification Wars, exhibited fatal flaws that made them unsuitable for the coming galactic campaign. Their unstable physiology, limited lifespan, and psychological volatility had already begun to manifest in alarming ways. Reports of Thunder Warriors experiencing sudden organ failure during routine operations increased, while incidents of uncontrollable battle rage directed at civilian populations required intervention by custodian forces. The Emperor had anticipated these limitations from the Thunder Warriors' inception. They had been designed as a temporary solution, a blunt instrument for the specific challenges of Terran unification, rather than the precise tool needed for a prolonged interstellar campaign. The genetic samples preserved from the scattered Primarchs now provided the template for a more sustainable and versatile transhuman warrior, the Adeptus Astartes. The fundamental concept behind the Astartes represented a significant evolution in the Emperor's approach to gene enhancement. Where the Thunder Warriors had been created through aggressive modification of adult subjects, resulting in powerful but unstable warriors, the Astartes would be transformed through a more measured process beginning in early adolescence. This approach sacrificed some of the raw power that characterized the Thunder Warriors in exchange for significantly improved stability, longevity, and psychological balance. The core of this new process centered on gene seed, specialized organs cultivated from Primarch genetic material that would be implanted sequentially into selected candidates. Each organ served a specific function. The secondary heart provided redundancy for cardiovascular function. The os medulla strengthened and enhanced the skeletal structure. The biscopia dramatically increased muscle mass and density, and so on. Together, these 19 implanted organs would transform an ordinary human into a transhuman warrior capable of surviving environments and injuries that would kill unmodified humans instantly. The Emperor personally supervised the initial development of these gene seed organs, working alongside selected geneticists in the same underground facilities that had housed the Primarch project. Each gene seed line derived from a specific Primarch exhibited unique characteristics that reflected its genetic source. The organs cultivated from the 7th Primarch's genetic material showed exceptional durability and resistance to toxins. Those derived from the 13th demonstrated superior healing capabilities and tissue regeneration. The 16th Primarch's gene line produced warriors with heightened aggression and combat reflexes. These variations were not considered flaws, but specialized adaptations that would allow each legion to excel in particular combat roles. The Emperor envisioned a force where each legion's genetic predispositions would complement the others, creating a versatile military apparatus capable of addressing any challenge encountered during the Great Crusade. This specialization extended beyond mere physical attributes to cognitive tendencies, with some gene lines producing warriors more inclined toward methodical planning, while others favored intuitive decision-making in fluid combat situations. The first implantation procedures took place in specially constructed facilities beneath the Himalayan mountains. The initial candidates were selected from the children of Terran nobility and military leaders who had demonstrated loyalty during the Unification Wars. These young recruits, typically between 10 and 14 years old, underwent extensive screening to ensure genetic compatibility with the implantation process. Even with careful selection, early failure rates remained high, with nearly 60% of candidates dying during the procedure or developing fatal complications afterward. Through iterative refinement, the Astartes creation process gradually improved. Mechanicum Biologi's adepts contributed specialized equipment that allowed for more precise implantation and monitoring. New screening protocols identified subtle genetic markers that predicted successful integration. Modifications to the surgical procedures themselves reduced trauma and accelerated recovery. By the time the first full companies were ready for deployment, success rates had improved to approximately 60%, though this varied significantly between different gene seed lines. The training regimen developed for these first Astartes combined physical conditioning, tactical instruction, and psychological conditioning designed to maximize the potential of their enhanced bodies. Unlike the Thunder Warriors, whose training had focused almost exclusively on direct combat applications, Astartes candidates received education in strategy, logistics, and various specialized warfare domains. This comprehensive approach reflected their intended role not merely as shock troops, but as adaptable warriors capable of independent operation across diverse environments. As the first Astartes companies reached operational readiness, the Emperor faced the delicate challenge of transitioning from Thunder Warrior to Astartes' dominance. The Thunder Warriors, despite their deteriorating condition, remained formidable fighters with a fierce pride in their status as the Emperor's first transhuman warriors. Many had developed strong bonds of brotherhood through shared combat experiences during the Unification Wars. Simply discarding them risked not only wasting valuable military assets, but potentially creating dangerous opponents familiar with Imperial tactics and capabilities. The solution came in the form of a final glorious campaign, the Battle of Mount Ararat. This engagement against the last significant concentration of techno-barbarian forces was presented to the Thunder Warriors as their crowning achievement, the final act that would secure Terra's unification. In reality, it served as both a legitimate military objective and a controlled environment for the Thunder Warriors' final deployment. The battle itself was genuine, with techno-barbarian forces offering fierce resistance from heavily fortified positions. The Thunder Warriors performed as they always had, with devastating effectiveness and complete disregard for their own safety. By the battle's conclusion, they had secured a decisive victory for Imperial forces, but at tremendous cost to their own numbers. Those who survived found themselves celebrated as heroes of unification, awarded honors and privileges that included residence in specialized facilities ostensibly designed for their medical needs. The truth behind these facilities remains one of the Emperor's more controversial decisions. While providing genuine medical support that temporarily stabilized the Thunder Warriors' deteriorating physiology, they also served as controlled environments where the remaining warriors could be monitored and, if necessary, contained. Over subsequent months, as preparation for the Great Crusade accelerated, the Thunder Warriors gradually succumbed to their genetic flaws, their numbers dwindling until only a handful remained, isolated individuals who either escaped the containment facilities or had been detached from main forces during the final battles. With the Thunder Warrior chapter effectively closed, the Emperor focused fully on developing the Astartes legions into the spearhead of his coming crusade. Each legion received not only specialized training based on their genetic predispositions, but equipment tailored to their anticipated combat roles. The initial patterns of power armor, while primitive compared to later marks, represented a significant advancement over anything fielded during the Unification Wars. This first generation of Astartes power armor, retroactively designated as Mark I Thunder Armor, incorporated elements from Thunder Warrior designs, but with significant improvements in joint articulation and power distribution. The armor consisted of layered ceramite plates over a powered exoskeleton, with rudimentary life support systems that allowed for limited operation in hostile environments. Its most distinctive visual features were the abdominal power unit that housed the primary energy source and the rounded, cylindrical helmet with its distinctive breather units. Mark I armor's limitations became apparent during early field testing. The abdominal power unit created a vulnerable target area while restricting waist movement, and the complete armor system weighed nearly twice what later marks would. Despite these drawbacks, it provided protection far superior to anything available to conventional forces and included strength enhancement that allowed Astartes to utilize weapons too heavy for unaugmented humans to wield effectively. The signature weapon of these early Astartes was the bolter, a weapon conceptually similar to those used by Thunder Warriors, but refined for improved reliability and standardized production. These early patterns fired mass reactive explosive rounds capable of penetrating most contemporary armor before detonating inside the target. The standard issue bolter was designed specifically for Astartes' physiology, with dimensions and recoil characteristics that would make it unwieldy for normal humans. Complementing these ranged weapons were power weapons that utilized disruption field technology to enhance cutting and penetrating power. Early patterns included power swords, axes, and mauls, each designed to overcome different types of enemy protection. These weapons required significant power sources, initially provided by backpack units that limited mobility and endurance. Later refinements would integrate power systems directly into the weapons themselves, but these early models required careful management of energy consumption during extended operations. The first field deployment of Astartes forces beyond Terra targeted Luna, Earth's moon, which had remained outside Imperial control during the Unification Wars. Luna housed numerous gene cults and independent scientific enclaves that had maintained their autonomy through a combination of distance, defensive capabilities, and possession of technologies valuable enough to deter previous conquest attempts. As the Emperor prepared for the Great Crusade, bringing these facilities under compliance became a strategic priority. The Luna campaign served multiple purposes beyond simple territorial expansion. It provided a controlled environment for testing Astartes' capabilities in void warfare, established protocols for compliance actions that would be used throughout the Great Crusade, and secured additional scientific and manufacturing facilities needed for fleet expansion. Perhaps most importantly, it offered an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of the Astartes to the various Terran power structures now incorporated into the Imperium. The operation began with precision strikes against Luna's defensive systems by small Astartes teams deployed via specialized landing craft. These initial attacks targeted sensor arrays and automated weapon platforms, creating gaps in the defensive network that allowed for the deployment of larger forces. Once ground teams secured landing zones, heavier equipment and support personnel established forward bases from which systematic compliance operations could proceed. The gene cults of Luna, despite their considerable technological advantages and home-ground knowledge, found themselves outmatched by the Astartes' combination of physical capabilities, tactical flexibility, and void warfare adaptability. Within weeks, major resistance had been eliminated, with surviving cult leaders either accepting Imperial compliance or being removed and replaced with administrators loyal to Terra. The success of the Luna campaign validated the Astartes concept and provided valuable experience that informed subsequent refinements to both equipment and tactics. Void warfare required modifications to armor systems to incorporate more robust life support capabilities. Combat in Luna's low-gravity environment demonstrated the need for specialized training in three-dimensional maneuvering. Encounters with automated defense systems highlighted vulnerabilities in early armor designs that would be addressed in subsequent iterations. As the Astartes legions expanded through recruitment and new gene seed implantation, their organizational structures evolved beyond the simple company formations of early deployments. Each legion developed specialized units based on their particular strengths and the preferences of their commanding officers. Some emphasized heavy assault capabilities, others reconnaissance and rapid deployment, still others specialized in siege warfare or void combat. This specialization, while increasing overall strategic flexibility, also began to create distinctive legion cultures that would later prove significant. The Emperor encouraged this diversification within controlled parameters, recognizing that specialized forces would be necessary for the varied challenges of the Great Crusade. At the same time, he established standardized protocols for inter-legion cooperation, ensuring that these developing cultural differences would not impede combined operations. Regular war games and joint training exercises brought together units from different legions, fostering both competitive spirit and mutual respect. As the legions grew in size and capability, the Emperor initiated construction of the first major expeditionary fleets that would carry the Great Crusade beyond the Sol system. These massive armadas combined Astartes strike forces with conventional Imperial Army units, mechanicum technical support, administrative personnel, and colonization resources. Each fleet was designed as a self-sufficient operation capable of extended deployment without resupply from Terra, carrying everything needed to both conquer and integrate human worlds into the expanding Imperium. The vessels comprising these fleets represented the pinnacle of recovered human technology, with many designs based on STC patterns preserved by the mechanicum of Mars. The flagship of each major fleet typically featured a massive battle barge capable of deploying entire Astartes companies directly to planetary surfaces via drop pods and assault boats. Supporting vessels included troop transports for Imperial Army forces, specialized mechanicum craft housing technical expertise and manufacturing capabilities, and logistics ships carrying supplies and equipment for extended operations. As these fleets neared completion, the Emperor made his final preparations for departure from Terra. Administrative systems were established under Malcador's oversight to maintain imperial function during the Emperor's absence. Defense protocols ensured Terra would remain secure with reduced Astartes presence. Mechanicum Forge complexes on both Terra and Mars accelerated production of weapons, armor, and equipment needed for the expanding Crusade forces. In a ceremony marking the official launch of the Great Crusade, the Emperor addressed representatives from all segments of his new imperium. He spoke of humanity's destiny among the stars, the imperative to reunite scattered human worlds, and the dangers that threatened human survival in a hostile galaxy. This address, preserved in fragmentary records, emphasized not conquest for its own sake, but the necessity of human unification against external threats too great for fragmented worlds to withstand alone. As the first expeditionary fleets departed the Sol system, they carried with them the Emperor's vision of a united human galaxy. The scattered Primarchs, though lost, remained a driving force behind this monumental undertaking. Their genetic legacy lived on in the Astartes legions, while the Emperor's determination to recover his sons added personal urgency to the systematic exploration of distant star systems. The Unification Wars had secured humanity's birthworld and established the foundation for imperial expansion. The Thunder Warriors, having served their purpose, gave way to the more versatile and stable Astartes legions. Terra, once divided among warring techno-barbarian states, now stood united as the capital of humanity's resurgent interstellar civilization. As the Great Crusade began in earnest, the Emperor's gaze turned outward to the countless human worlds lost during Old Night, his determination to rebuild humanity's stellar dominion, matched only by his resolve to recover the scattered Primarchs, who would be instrumental in securing mankind's future among the stars.